on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
We're talking about freediving. You have one breath and you can choose to use that breath however you want. That's something that I love about spearfishing. I mean, when I shoot to kill, and I know that that fish is going to feed me through the winter.
I mean, you're talking about people who were wayfaring across the sea. If you're willing to get on a boat with like a campfire and some pigs and your whole family and you're going to set off like that, you probably have some swimming skills, I'm just guessing.
We all have a mammalian dive reflex. There's a lot of sensors in your face that basically register, wow, I'm in water right now and my body needs to make some changes to adapt to be ready for that environment.
As you're going straight down, the way the algae's coming past your face, it's just like you're traveling through interstellar space and it's just like zooming past you, and then all of a sudden you hit this clear spot and it's just super clear.
Episode number 34 of the WildFed podcast, Spearfishing the Bold Coast with Dylan Stewart, is brought to you by Surthrival. Surthrival was built on the premise of self-healthcare, the idea that ultimately you are responsible for your own health. Never before has that become more clear. While governments, health agencies, and medical professionals scramble to create policies and treatments for the masses, the wise amongst us are busy building the strongest, healthiest, and most adaptable versions of ourselves that we can. Surthrival specializes in time-tested immuno and adaptogenic formulas for modern humans. I've spoken at length here about one of Surthrival's flagship products, colostrum. It's been shown in peer-reviewed science to be 3 times more effective against flu than vaccines. A recent article on the University of Arizona's Center for Integrative Medicine's website notes that colostrum, quote, reduces 2 key cytokines involved in the symptoms of COVID-19, end quote. And while it's still too early to know what role colostrum might play in treating COVID, they write, quote, with a high-quality product, there is very low risk associated with bovine colostrum, end quote. Surthrival's colostrum is the highest grade on the market today, and now through July 3rd, all colostrum products at Surthrival are 20% off with the coupon code WeAreImmune. That's spelled WeRimmune. Again, it's with the letter R. We are immune, and that gets you 20% off all colostrum products. Again, the coupon code is WeAreImmune, and it's spelled with the letter R. Surthrival, thriving no matter the circumstances. Go to surthrival.com to check out the entire product line. Also, remember that WildFed is more than a podcast. We produce a TV show as well, and you can find that at wild-fed.com. Head over there to see the first episode for free and to sign up for our newsletter, The Subsistence, which includes exclusive stories, photos, and videos from me about the modern wild foods lifestyle. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. I've got a great show for you today with my friend Dylan Stewart from Bold Coast Burns. He's a freediver, spearfisher, and an artist specializing in a very unique style of wood-burned art, producing extremely lifelike replications of marine species that you just have to see to understand. If you want to check out his work as you're listening, you can find him on Instagram as @BoldCoastBurns. Dylan introduced me to spearfishing on the Maine coast, a place where very few freedivers and spearos care or dare to venture. It's cold, dark, low visibility water with an extremely limited fishery and almost no dive buddies to be found. Yet these are Dylan's hunting grounds, and it's one of the key places that inspires his incredible art form. One reason I love spearfishing, and it comes up a lot in this conversation, is unlike most angling, you have the ability to target a specific fish. Just yesterday, Avani and I took the boat down to the coast for the first time this season. The larger striped bass are making their way up the coast right now, and I wanted to see if we could catch one for the table. The new regulations this season require a fish to be at least 28 inches but under 35 inches. In other words, they have to fall into what's called a slot limit. I like this kind of management because it preserves fish that have yet to breed, and it also spares larger specimens that are statistically much more significant breeders. The challenge, however, especially for folks like us who aren't there for the sport of angling, is that you catch, handle, and release a lot of fish in an effort to find one you can keep. While a lot of people think of catch and release fishing as a more ethical and gentle way to approach the water, I struggle with it. Fish mortality is much higher than most anglers want to admit, and hooking fish for fun, no offense fly fishers, doesn't really excite me. I'm there to catch fish for food, and even the gentlest angling injures every fish that gets caught. Now, we started off the day jigging for mackerel over chum we'd made last year for mackerel frames and menhaden. We'd caught a couple dozen macks, and while the smaller fish went into the live well for bait, we bled and iced half a dozen larger ones to bring home and eat. And I'm glad we did, because even though we'd caught 7 beautiful striped bass, all over 2 feet in length, none of them fit into that slot limit. They all had to be put back. And despite the full kit of tools I bring along to ensure a quick and low trauma release, I suspect a couple of these fish won't survive the injuries they sustained from us catching them. Now, before any anglers start emailing me, I just want to be clear, I'm using circle hooks, which are required here, and have a tendency to hook the fish in the corner of the mouth more reliably than a standard J hook. I have fish grips for gently holding the fish by the mouth and controlling it so it doesn't get injured thrashing around on deck. I have short and long pliers for getting hooks out, and even bolt cutters for removing deep set hooks. Despite my saltwater surgical kit, angling causes trauma to fish. This is the poignancy of length restrictions. While they're intended to protect the resource, sometimes, as was the case for us yesterday, they cause more fish to die than would have if we'd just been able to keep the first one we caught. Instead, we kept fishing, ultimately landing more than a half a dozen fish and not being able to keep any of them. Was it a gorgeous day on the water? Yes. Did we have a great time? Yes. But if we'd been diving, and to be clear, we can't spearfish for striped bass here anyway, but I would have been able to target a specific fish. Instead, it's like a game of chance played through an obfuscating veil of light refracting water. Every fish we caught swam away on their own power, but how many survived their meeting with us, I'll never know. Dylan doesn't have that problem. He either spears a fish or he doesn't, and he sees that fish before he takes his shot. While spearfishing presents its own unique conservation issues, some of which we'll discuss in this interview, it's free of many of the problems associated with modern-day angling. So in the end, I'm cooking mackerel for dinner tonight, and listening back through this episode today makes me want to bring my wetsuit and spear gun next time I trailer the boat down to the coast. And it's a reminder to me that I'm better off waiting a few extra weeks for the larger fish to migrate their way up to Maine. Now, enjoy this conversation with Dylan Stewart, and if you have a specific fish you'd like to commemorate or, like me, a species that's totemic for you, consider picking up or commissioning a piece from him. And whether you're close to the coast or landlocked, I hope his willingness to operate in adverse conditions inspires you to push the envelope a bit in your own endeavors. Sometimes the real bounty is found just outside your comfort zone. I'm here with my friend Dylan Stewart and our producer Grant Giuliano. Dylan, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to my house.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, psyched to be here.
Man, it's pretty amazing to see your art today in person for the first time, because we became friends. I think we first connected on Instagram, right? I saw you comment on something I had posted.
Yep.
And it's funny with social media, because to me it's like, it's destroying my life. I feel like it's ruining my focus. It's ruining my dopamine cycle. It's affecting my health and my mental well-being and my vision. And I mean, there's some serious negatives to it, but I meet some pretty cool people.
Yeah, totally agree.
And, it's funny. It's pretty sick that people are like, yeah, no, I agree. It's like, oh my God. My wife says to me the other day, it's like, it's either my phone or my vision. And she's like, it freaks me out that I'm choosing my phone. You know, these are weird times. Anyway, I was on there on Instagram. I saw your comment, and I often will click over to see what somebody's feed's like before I respond, and opened up your page and was like, wow, saw your art, man. I was blown away, and then realized you were right here in Portland, Maine, and was like, I need to connect with this guy. So first of all, your art's amazing. And second, the stuff that you do in spearfishing, particularly here in Maine, very inspiring to me, really cool. So anyway, just glad to finally sit down and record with you. So welcome, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm psyched for the opportunity. This is sweet.
And let's give people the Instagram handle now so they can go check it out.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Grant. So it's Bold Coast Burns, right?
Yep.
At Bold Coast Burns. And then if somebody's not on their phone hearing this, but they're at a computer, where would you send them to see your art? Would you send them to your Instagram, or do you have a Facebook or anything like that?
They could just go, Facebook's the same, just Bold Coast Burns, and then The website is just boldcoastburns.com.
Yeah, so I would recommend, as Grant said, as you're listening to this, it'd be really cool if you could go over and take a look at some of this art so you understand what we're talking about here. Dylan is a really, really unique and fantastic art Piscatalian artist. I don't know what to call it. You do fish.
I like that. Yeah. That's a great title.
Yeah. So, well, kind of. And you're a spearfisher here on the. First of all, where'd the name come from? Bold Coast. I love that name.
Yeah. So I grew up about 2/3 of the way up the coast in the Bar Harbor area, and just north of that, you kind of enter the Cutler Coast. The Bold Coast of Maine is the kind of northern portion of the coast, the Bay of Fundy. It's just a wild ocean up there. And I was just trying to come up with a name. Originally, it was my name. That was it. And then I just kind of wanted to come up with something that would really stick with people. And the Bold Coast of Maine is my favorite part of Maine. It's just a magical place in my mind, and it had a nice ring to it. And
it does have a nice ring.
It just, it stuck.
I feel like our coast is so underrated. There's just so much talk about the West Coast. So I love anything like that: the cold coast, the right coast, the bold coast, the
best coast.
The what's that?
Best
the
coast.
Best coast. Yeah, I feel like we just get underrated over here, and it is a hardy and rugged coastline, so I think it really speaks to where you are and where you dive. And just kind of give us a little bit of briefing on your wild food kind of practice as well, because you do some spearfishing in a place that there's very few people who would even like really have what it takes to attempt it.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like pretty uncharted territory up here, and there aren't a whole lot of resources for it. I started diving sometime in high school in Rhode Island. My mom grew up in Rhode Island, and so we still have
so you were going to school?
Quite a connection. No, not to school, but in the summer, that was where I kind of spent a lot of my time, and mainly because I wanted that access to, the Block Island, Rhode Island in general just has such for the East Coast, it has a really diverse marine ecosystem.
It's kind of a sweet spot in the coast, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot going on there.
Because as you get further north, it's like the biodiversity really starts to kind of drop off.
Exactly,
right?
And it's so noticeable. Each state, as you move north, you really notice it. And Maine is, kind of the end of the line in that the range of a lot of those species. So I started diving in Rhode Island, and then I did go to college in Boston, and then afterwards I just wanted to try something different, moved out to Colorado for about 3 years, and did a lot of skiing and backpacking, spent a lot of time, got my mountain fix, and then met my wife out there, and we moved back to Maine.
Where was she from?
She's from Western New York.
Okay, cool.
Rochester
This wasn't
area.
too different for her.
No, it wasn't. But she hadn't really spent any time living in a coastal area. But I found myself really missing it a lot out there. So then we ended up moving back to Maine, moved to Portland, and I immediately started thinking, where can I start diving again? Because I hadn't been diving in a few years.
And just for people listening, we're talking about free diving.
We're talking about free diving. Yep. This is all on your own breath, and it's been around for several different cultures around the world. We're starting to spearfish at the same time. It's really it's an unbelievable.
Historically, you're talking about.
Yeah, historically.
Yeah, I feel that it's. A lot of times archaeologists and anthropologists, I feel like their perspective coming out of the culture that they do is sometimes limited. And because these are people, like your average anthropologist or your average archaeologist wouldn't be engaged in wild food acquisition, they maybe have assumptions or biases that they're not aware of. And to me, it's very obvious that diving would have been something that would have existed fairly early on in human culture and would have been pretty developed for any coastal people. I hear this thing said a lot and repeated often, and somebody just said it to me the other day. It was talking about the first person to ever eat an oyster, the first person to ever eat a clam, like how brave that would be. And I'm like, no, sorry, no. Like, I think the first person to encounter that would have immediately slurped that down. Like, when you're eating off your landscape, like, some of the stuff's fairly obvious and apparent. You're like, that's food, I'm going for it. And I just think really early on in history, people would have pushed deeper and deeper. And some of these breath holding techniques and these, aquatic movement skills seem like they'd be pretty fundamental to people. Like, the idea that this is something new, or I don't know. I don't know if I'm making sense, but it feels very intuitive to me.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, that's really the only explanation for why it was happening all around the world at the same exact time. Like, I mean, in totally opposite parts of the world too. Right. I mean, in Hawaii, they were in the Pacific, they were getting into it. And
the Hawaiians, I mean, you're talking about people who they were wayfaring across the sea to get, I mean, that's 2,000 miles from any real coast, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, you would think your diving skills, if you're willing to like get on a boat with like a campfire and some pigs and your whole family, and you're going to set off like that, you probably have some swimming skills. I'm just guessing.
Yeah. And I mean, it's crazy too, like the different tools that people were using for freediving and spearfishing specifically. It's like I use a pole spear still, which is that and a Hawaiian sling are kind of the two most primitive weapons, I guess, used for spearfishing from totally different parts of the world.
Oh, I am curious about that though, because they rely on, at least modern iterations rely on, industrially produced rubber.
Right.
And I've wondered a lot about something like that. Like with a bow, you have the stretch is in the stave itself, right, in the bow itself, and the string is fairly static.
Yeah.
So I wonder about...
I don't know the answer to that, because, I mean, now they are modern kind of iterations of older, both for the pole spear and Hawaiian. I mean, even modern Hawaiian slings.
What's a Hawaiian sling?
Hawaiian sling is... so a pole spear is the first spearfishing tool that most people use when they're getting into it, but it's... I mean, it can be as simple as like a broom handle with a few sharp pieces of metal on the end and then a rubber band on the other end. So you basically just put your thumb through the loop on the one end and then pull the handle all the way back, and then you're loaded.
Yeah. So you've got a spear, right? Like a long spear. One end is a rubber band loop that's probably at the apogee is like 12 inches long, 15 inches long, something. You reach that through your thumb, and then you reach up and stretch that thing out, and then when you release, the spear shoots forward. But the Hawaiian sling's more like a slingshot.
It is, yeah, and it has a barrel, actually. So you essentially have, it looks like an arrow, going through a barrel, and then attached to the barrel is another rubber band, similar, it could be a piece of surgical tubing or whatever, that's about the same length as you'd see on the end of a pole spear. And then you hold that shaft the barrel with one hand, and then pull back with the other one. It's kind of like a slingshot.
So it's going through that tube. That's what
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's fairly simple too. We're just talking about, it's almost like a
piece of PVC or something.
Yeah, like pretty simple. Often they're wood, but it looks like it's like a toilet paper tube. You know what I mean? My wife likes that a lot. I think it looks a lot like archery in a way too. When you see someone doing it,
totally,
it's very similar to drawing and releasing an arrow, like you said. It's my wife's preferred method. What I don't like about it is that once you release that projectile, it's gone. It's not tethered to you the way the spear gun is, or the way the Hawaiian sling sort of stays looped around your hand.
Yeah, so it works really well for smaller reef fish, which honestly in Hawaii and the islands, that's primarily what they're targeting.
Because you'll go retrieve it after.
Yeah, I mean, and the visibility is so good there that you can literally just watch where it goes, and go find it if it's not a perfect shot. Yeah.
Also, you have a more limited range.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty close. Pole spear, I would maybe argue, is I don't have a whole lot of Hawaiian sling experience, but pole spear is really close. I mean, they're getting more and more advanced. It's pretty amazing how advanced.
But the pole spear is pretty long, so you can hold that out in front of you and reach, a couple meters out in front of you. Whereas with, like my wife, because she spent her life she's so aquatic. I mean, her whole life's been spent in the water. Her ability to approach fish is very natural, and they're like super relaxed around her. I'm like a tank rolling down the street when I get in the water. So it's like the fish are kind of like, oh yeah, I don't like this guy coming anywhere near me. So I like to spear gun a lot because I can reach out a little bit further, but she's able to just sort of like swim up and fish are like, hi,
They're like,
who
oh,
are you?
mermaid.
Yeah, exactly. Very comfortable around her.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it's just the way you approach the fish
Yeah.
and the way and the
Yeah.
whole kind of demeanor and the way you enter that dive is how you're going to be perceived, by fish.
So you got involved in spearfishing down in, you were saying, in Rhode Island?
In Rhode Island, yep. And then when we moved back I felt pretty spoiled in Rhode Island because the diving is just,
And there's a big dive culture there.
there is nothing compared to Florida or places closer to the equator,
But for the East Coast,
for the East Coast, the Northeast, that's kind of, Long Island, New York has a pretty big diving spearfishing population
okay.
too. But that whole area there's a community there. Up here, there's no community.
Nothing.
I mean, it's us. It's like you and me and 5 other people.
And that's like, and I've
Is it really
I've got
that
like,
small?
Yeah,
it's
unbelievable.
It's almost non-existent.
Yeah.
But backing up a little bit, though, your family was involved in ocean fisheries historically, right? Like, so you sort of come out of a fisheries family.
Yep. Yeah. So my mom's whole side of the family are Dutch, and they are pretty much all commercial fishermen. I mean, through the generations, that's what they all do to this day. My cousins, they are all either have aquaculture projects or they're still several draggers in the family, scallop fishermen, and it's a pretty diverse in terms of their different disciplines.
So fisheries were sort of already in the background for you, sort of as you were growing up.
Yeah, and I think that would have been a direction I could have maybe pursued, but I struggle still with a lot of different areas around conservation, and I think that fisheries are going to need to really start adapting to like what we need to do right now.
Yeah.
And I think
it's a challenging scenario, isn't it?
It is, and especially when your family it's very right. It kind of creates. And then my dad is he did commercially fish with my mom's family for a while, but he got out of it, and he is very conservation minded, and and that's kind of where I got my conservation.
Right.
Kind of like my whole. I definitely lean in that direction.
What's your view of spearfishing from a conservation perspective compared to angling, let's say? Or, like I think we don't need to go down the road of commercial fisheries. It's so contentious and there's so much there to pick apart. But, one of the arguments you'll hear is that spearfishing is more sustainable in the sense that you are selecting one fish. You're not leaving hooks in the mouths of fish. You're not accidentally hooking fish that you have to put back, all those kind of things. Do you kind of like see spearfishing as a more selective and sustainable thing? Or because on the flip side, I always see like these gigantic big breeder fish coming out of the water too. So I always wonder about that.
Yeah, I think that it can be more sustainable and a better practice if it's done correctly and with the right mindset. And I think that with social media, I think it's becoming, the culture around it is changing, not for the better. I think in a bad way. I think a lot of, you see more and more posts of there's a competitive thing going on,
hardcore,
and I think it's kind of scary in terms of spearfishing specifically, and rod and reel as well. But I do think that I think they can both be done sustainably. I think in terms of what you initially mentioned in terms of gear being left in the fish or left on the bottom, I think that is definitely a problem. And I've seen schools of striped bass, and 3 of the fish in the school have a hook with a big piece of monofilament hanging out of their mouth.
Right.
And I don't care if you are catching, I think catch and release is awesome. And but the mortality rate is still higher than it should be with catch and release. And I think that, I do think that spear fishermen often can be a little high and mighty about the fact that they are more sustainable. But then when you think about it, it's like if you're just getting into spearfishing and you've just started, you don't know what you're looking for. You don't know how big that fish needs to be and what it looks like. It looks 10% bigger or whatever underwater. It's like there's all these different factors that I think it's really hard to come into spearfishing without any experience and really be selective and I think that comes with time and unfortunately, or having somebody somebody to kind of guide you along the way, which is huge.
I got first exposed to the idea of spearfishing from Kimmy Werner, and I've never seen a photo of her holding up like a gigantic. I'm sure. I mean, they probably exist, but I always see her with like plate-sized fish.
Yeah,
and I think that's part of what she's trying to promote, because a lot of times I see people holding up fish bigger than them,
right? And
you're like, wow, like it's amazing to see those fish. But at the same time, it feels like they're hunting down the biggest fish in the sea sometimes, and I wonder about that.
Right, and I think that the larger fish are bigger breeders. They produce more offspring, and I think that it's a tough balance, because I will say it is tough when you're down there and you see the biggest fish you've seen. It is a conscious decision, but we are in charge of educating and advocating for the fish populations that we do have, and they do change over time, and overall it's like the whole shifting baselines thing. It's like what we think is a lot of fish now isn't really a lot of fish,
right? I think that's one of the issues in the we've been talking about cod for a little while, and we'll talk about that more in a second. So that idea of the shifting baseline, I'd love to articulate that for people. As I understand it, it kind of refers to, and I think fisheries is where that idea came out of, because you can apply that idea of a shifting baseline to a lot of things. But I think the basic idea is you tend to think what it was like when you were a child is the good old days, and what it's like now is depleted. And people don't realize that the good old days when they were a kid was depleted from the good old days of the generation before and before and before. You and I have been talking a lot about cod, and I drive around now. My hunting rig still has that cod sticker that you made, on the back of it, which I occasionally get comments from people who recognize.
Oh, you made that cod
That's
sticker?
his sticker.
Oh,
yeah, I love that sticker, man. It's
cool.
so cool. Because I feel like cod's this sort of thing that's connected us for a while. But that's one where 500 years ago, the cod fishery, what it was like.
The abundance,
the density, the ability to follow cod from Europe to North America, cod's ability to kickstart the U.S. and Canadian economies, and allowed the Vikings to sort of travel around the northern Atlantic. I mean, cod is just this crucially, anybody who's read Kurlansky's book, Cod, which is a kind of American history told through the perspective of cod.
I love that book.
It's a good book, right? Mm-hmm. And then Grant and I, having gone up to Newfoundland and sort of learned about the importance of cod to that economy and that history. But you have the commercial cod fishery today, which still exists in some places, where people are arguing, no, there's plenty of cod. And it's like, yeah, but that's your shifting baseline, right? Because it seems like there's plenty of cod because you can still catch them, but it's nothing like what it was, right? So that's kind of what you're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, that's pretty much my same understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think it's a really powerful perspective, because I think about when I've read a book recently about brook trout. And it was like, when I read historically, because I have no problem going out into any of these brooks and catching. There's plenty of brook trout, but they're all like little sardines. And reading about historically what the brook trout fishery was like when Europeans first came here, it's like, oh, there's barely anything left, And that's just a hard thing to deal with, when you sort of learn about historically, how much loss there's been. So the commercial fishery has definitely been responsible for that. On the recreational side, I think sometimes we're a little high and mighty, though, and we act like we're not having an impact.
Totally. You think of striped bass is a good example, really too. Good example. I think of what both recreational and commercial as a duo have done to striped bass populations. I think you go to the Cape Cod Canal, and it's just both sides of the canal are lined with fishermen. It's like there's these certain places.
With little clickers on them that they can't, have you seen this, Grant? Like, an angler will have like a little clicker, and they're just keeping every fish they catch, click one, like little counters. Like they're just how many can they catch in the season?
Right.
Catch, release, catch, release, catch, release, catch, release, just poking holes in fish.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that's where I have an issue with catch and release, because you are, that's where fishing really, I don't think that fishing as a sport is any better than fishing.
Fishing as a sport isn't cool.
I mean, I feel like, that's like, I think there's a lot to be said for catch and release, but that's something that I love about spearfishing. I mean, when I shoot to kill, and I know that fish is going to feed me through the winter, and that's what I'm trying to do. Our season is so short here.
Yeah.
And that's why I shift my whole work schedule. I shift everything to make sure that I can be in the water during the most important parts of the year for spearfishing and the most prolific, because the fish come inshore and then in the winter they go offshore, and they're not here. I mean, I've dove here in the winter and it seems devoid of life. I mean, it's a desert, but a beautiful desert, but it's a desert down there. Right. And so I do think that there's something special about acknowledging what the populations are doing and trying to be really, when I try to get people into spearfishing, the first thing I try to go over with them is, these are the fish that you can feel good about, putting in your freezer, and these are the fish you can't. And that's always evolving and changing, but we're in charge here, especially, like, we are really in charge of our own, educating. We need to educate, because I don't really see fish and wildlife on the coast. I don't really see DEM around. We're self-regulating, really.
It's true. Yeah, in the spear fishery you're talking about.
Right, in the spear fishery.
I want to circle back to this spearfishing, kind of talk about your practice and sort of also some of your experience outside of Maine. But first I want to come back around to talk a little bit about your art, because like I said, that was what first got my attention. I mean, on social media, you talk to so many people and you see so many people's sort of little snippets of their life. But as soon as I saw your art, I was like, this dude's dialed into something. I really need to talk to him. Talk a little bit about the evolution of your work as an artist, how you got started doing, fish art, and kind of where it's led you to.
Yeah. So, first of all,
and let me add one more piece. I just bought my first piece from you today when you got here, which I'm really, really pumped about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate, all the support, from everybody and from you. And it's just been like a really special evolution for me trying to pursue art as a career. It's taken a long time, and I think, I've been drawing fish for as long as I can remember, because I've always been so inspired by marine life and marine ecosystems and fish specifically. I went to school for graphic design in Boston, in the heart of the city. And in graphic design field these days, that you're behind a computer for 10 hours a day. It could be more than that, depending on deadlines and stuff.
And that's commercial art, right?
Commercial art, totally.
I rely heavily on graphic designers for my businesses, and I really appreciate what they do. But I imagine as an artist, there's that sense of, I'd like to be doing art that is born out of my soul, not just because I'm doing it for corporate.
Yeah, but I do, and I still do a little design work, and my wife is a full-time graphic designer, and I definitely, I still love it. I think it's still a great, and I think that that's where I immediately, when I was going to school and I needed to figure out what I was going to be doing, in college, it's like you pick what you're going to do for the rest of your life in the first year of school or whatever. So the natural, progression for me was graphic design. And then I was in college, I was spending so much time behind a computer, and all my free time I was just drawing fish, doodling, and and it always came back to fish for me. And professors and people throughout school would say, it's, you can do that in your free time, but don't be spending your valuable time here, just doodling and stuff, because it's not a viable way to make make money
you
is
said
what
it
they
to me
were.
one
That's
time,
what they were getting at.
That they told you like you're not going to make a living drawing fish.
Yeah. And I mean that's
pretty powerful because you're making a living drawing fish, right? So it's like,
finally, yeah.
yeah, but you're pretty young, man. I mean, how old are you?
30.
Yeah. So it's like, they say it's sort of like you start hitting your stride around 28, 29, 30. Your career starts to crystallize a little bit, so it's like, seems like you're right on track. But I think that's powerful when people tell you like absolutely the thing that does end up working is the thing that won't work. And then it does, like pushing through that because you can easily listen to those messages.
Yeah. And it's a motive. I mean, it did affect me. I think I did think, wow, maybe, yeah, like, how do I value my time and what should I be doing? And then, I kind of laid off of it for a little while. I was still drawing, a lot, but when I moved out to Colorado after school and everything, I was just doing odd jobs. I did not want to do design. I did not want to sit behind a computer. That was my number one thing.
You'd already gone to school.
I had already gone to school. So it was, that's what my skill set was in. But I just kept coming. Maybe it's the commercial fishing in my blood. I don't know. But I just kept coming back to hardcore physical work, and I was like, when I moved to Colorado, I was working on a organic farm for a long time, and then I ended up working for a wooden jigsaw puzzle company out there, which was really cool. I learned a lot. That actually
does that seems like it's come into play.
It definitely applies a lot.
Can we pause for a second? And I think we should describe for the listener what your art currently where it's at, and then we'll come back right to where we were, so that people know what you do. Yeah.
So I do wood-burned art, and I think wood-burned fish marine art. So I think when people first hear that, they think of the wood-burning pen that they had when they were 6 years old or whatever. That's kind of people's context when they think of wood burning. But I've tried to take a totally different approach, and I use through a lot of experimentation. My primary tools are torches, butane torches, propane torches, all different kinds of torches. So just a very raw flame that initially is hard to control. It's just a big blob, But then after experimenting, researching online, I could never find resources for it. So beyond just a wood burning pen and pieces that were small. So then I started just experimenting with torches, trying to get the initial shape of fish on just raw wood. I was sanding, but it was still like live edge pieces of maple.
I was going to say, if somebody
birch.
gets on your feed on Instagram and they scroll all the way to the bottom, the original stuff is like live edge pieces of wood with a fish burned onto it, which compared to what you make now looks so rudimentary and kind of, it's very primitive compared to where you've arrived.
100%. And I cringe when I look back. I mean, I
like that you've left that up.
I mean, I have friends that own pieces of my, first generation, the first few months, and I go into their house and I'm just like, oh man, can you just use that as firewood? I'll give you a new one. Just I can't.
Because now you actually cut the whole piece out. That's why when you said that you worked at a wooden jigsaw puzzle company, it looks like you're using a jigsaw to cut out these fish shapes.
Exactly. Yeah, and we were using lasers actually primarily there, laser engravers and laser cutters.
Jigsaw name.
But I would say one of the most valuable things. I work for several small businesses, and I think that the art side and the working with my hands and everything that to me felt a lot more intuitive. It's what a lot of artists struggle with is the business side of it, and I think that was really challenging for me in the beginning. But then after working for several businesses and understanding how their shipping computer software worked and how because it's all these aspects of the business you don't think about, or how
point of sale, merchant accounts,
exactly stuff, and those I think are things that a lot of artists struggle with, and I certainly did for a long time. But
you can't implement those things while in the creative artistic mindset. It's like two radically different functions. Like if I'm dealing with that stuff, it's very hard for me to feel big picture creative, and when I'm big picture creative, thinking about that stuff stymies my creativity. I find they're like two different modes.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that you just become better at compartmentalizing, and I have to be my natural instinct as an artist is just to not do any marketing, not do any, financial stuff. I don't want to do. That's the stuff I don't want to do. If it were up to me, I would just burn every day, and and be in my shop doing my thing.
Right.
But it's when you're a one person operation, you really need to figure out all aspects, aspects, and that better than anyone. And I think that where I've landed, I've got a good process finally that I know each part of the process, how it's going to go, how long I finish all my pieces with resin. I know what temperatures I need to cure my resin at. I know, how long it takes. And those are all things that,
as far as sort of like commercializing your process so that you can do it and sort of reliably produce this art, what it costs you, how long it's going to take, so that you...
Right. And now I kind of have two separate, I almost think of them as two separate parts of my business. I have the original custom pieces that I do for people, which, sometimes that's people have a specific fish that they want to commemorate, or it's just a certain species of fish, or they have a certain spot for, certain piece that they want. So that's kind of one part of my business, doing these, original pieces. And then I also have, as of this year, I have another part of my business that's kind of, I do reproduction. So, just as a photographer or a painter would do reproductions of an original, I'm doing that now. Doing archival giclée prints of my original studio photograph pieces, and then mounting them to wood and finishing them the same way that I finish an original. So
and then you do some prints and stickers and stuff as well.
Yeah, I do prints and decals as well. My goal is really to have something. I want to have something for everyone, and I think that's something that's been interesting through social media. Has been seeing all the different, the different kinds of people and different interests in our country all converging. It's like all of your followers or whatever on Instagram, they're from all over the country and all over the world, and they are all in different financial situations, but they're all there for a common reason, that they all appreciate what you're doing, and they connect to it in some way. So I think that my goal has always been, I don't want to just have something for the wealthiest people in the country. I want to have something for everybody, So now I feel like I finally have struck the balance that if you want to own a piece of my art, you can.
Yeah. Well, it's really cool. I want to describe this piece I got from you today just as an example of what the work that you do, but it's probably, that's almost 3.5 feet long or so?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So it's a cod cut out of a piece of maple. And with these burning techniques, it's incredible to me how lifelike the burn on the wood is. I assume it has something to do with the fact that the wood is organic, because it takes this burn almost like airbrushing or something. Like, it's incredibly lifelike quality, and then you cover it in this layer of resin that makes it look wet. So you get this impression that the fish has just come out of the water. And the depth that you get in the way that the burn and the wood grain work together gives this, would you agree, Grant, like a very lifelike sense, definitely. When I first saw your work, I thought this is a great alternative to taxidermy, because I've always found, now I admittedly, I'm somebody, as you can see here, like I prefer a European mount. I like skulls. I'm not a big fan of mounted taxidermies. I don't like the idea of like all that hair sort of like collecting dust and cobwebs and everything. So I like to keep skulls. But fish, I don't keep any taxidermies of, or any trophies, if you will, of, partially because I kind of get skeeved out by it. So the people I know that have aged fish taxidermies, man, they're just they get gross.
Yeah, they get kind of gnarly.
They get gnarly. Like my wife's family's got an amazing, it's a northern pike, but you'd almost think it's a muskie. It's huge. Her grandfather, I guess, up in Quebec, what would happen is they'd go in and do like virgin timber logging and open up lakes that no one had ever fished. And then he would get sort of first dibs and go in there and get to fish these untouched fisheries, 80 years ago or something. And so he's got this giant pike, but now the skin's breaking away, and underneath it you can see it's like, it looks like it's some kind of paper mache underneath. It's like newspaper that's been used to build up the interior of it. And that's all showing through, and the scales are just peeling off. It just looks gross, And then I know that people do the carvings. So that's an alternative, right? You take photos and measurements of your fish, and you can get a carver to do it, or you can get a 3D plastic sort of replica. Anyway, when I saw what you do, I was like, ooh, that's really, to me, very tasteful. Because the idea, too, of a plastic fish, I've seen some nice one. Tony Bray's got that really nice Grant. We've seen it, the big halibut that he's got in his living room. Do you remember that? I think that looks really nice. It looks classy. But anyway, what you do, I love it because it's like you could take a species that you care about. This cod, for instance, has a lot of meaning to me, this fish. And so it's like a chance to have a cod in the house without having to have some kind of like weird preserved cod body.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I like to hear people's different perspectives on it, and I think that it has been so experimental. It's kind of, wood burning's been around. It's an ancient art form,
right.
But I do kind of feel like people are stuck in a little bit of a rut, most wood burning artists, because you're given one tool, which is a wood burning pen, which is what most people use. And most wood burns that you see are hyper detailed, and they're all under probably 2 feet in size. They're very small. And me coming from a fishing background, fish artwork doesn't have the same effect to me unless it's to scale. I mean, I love there's something about a bluefin tuna being the size of a bluefin tuna, or a striped bass being the size of a striped bass. Right. And I don't think that goes for every medium necessarily in terms of art. I just think something about the way the grain pops through when you hit it with a torch, and something about the wood, it's just asking to be bigger. Yeah. So I always try to push people, it seems like I always try to push people to just, if they want to go life size, we should do it.
Recently I saw, like, I'm on your Instagram kind of seeing what you've been up to, and I see this white shark that you're working on.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And who's that for? Is that a museum or something?
So that is by far my biggest piece.
Is it to scale?
To date, it's to scale. It's like it would be even a big great white shark. Yeah. It's 17 feet long.
Wow. Awesome.
And it's logistically has been really challenging to piece the whole thing together just to find
Are you doing it on
space
location, or are you doing it at your place?
No, I'm actually doing it up north at my folks' place, because they actually have a space that.
So then you'll have to get it to the owner.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna get a U-Haul, and I've got a team assembled, and we're just gonna go down. So it's going to Newport, Rhode Island. I'm in a restaurant down there.
Oh, really? What restaurant?
Yeah, it's called Zelda's. Yeah. It's right downtown. And
Newport's a fishy place.
Newport is a very fishy place. So I was going to deliver it in December, but it just didn't work out. So we're going to do it early January, and it's a beast.
Zelda's
is
a restaurant?
Zelda's is a restaurant.
So they're going to have it right up in there.
Yeah, they've got a huge wall in there.
That's going to be great.
And it's going to be facing the street, so when people walk by, they're going to see it.
Oh, that's cool, man. That's really cool.
But, it's been one of my dreams to do a wood burn mural, and I mean, to my knowledge, this shark is the biggest wood burn on the planet. I think I can't find anything bigger than that.
No kidding.
I mean, maybe it's out there, and I'd love it if somebody could direct me.
So you're not just innovating on the fish side of the art piece, but you're also innovating in the wood burning.
I think so. I mean, maybe I'm totally way off base on that, but using the avenues that I have at my disposal, I haven't been able to find.
Yeah.
Just, you see surfboards. A lot of people do beautiful work on surfboards and stuff, but in terms of really large scale wood burning, I think there's a couple other artists that are kind of doing similar things, but we're all, I feel like, pushing it, just going bigger and bigger. Yeah. But it's still experimental, but yeah, I mean, Instagram is definitely the best way to kind of see it all in one place. And I do have work in several different places around the Northeast here, but yeah.
Well, I just say to people, like, if you're interested in commemorating a specific fish or a specific species, definitely have a look at Dylan's stuff because it's very cool. I had asked you to bring up, I'd never seen any of it in person. We've dived together a couple times now. I've never seen any of your work in person until today. And so I was like, bring some stuff up. So you brought a couple reproductions, an octopus and a striped bass.
Yep.
So that's where you have kind of an innovative process there. So you're still on the wood.
Yep.
But it's sort of like a combination of a print, but it's still got the lacquer on it. Very hard to discern at any distance that it's not an original. But then you brought up the original cod, and I was like, well, I kind of have to have that because the grain coming through that wood, it's just incredible how lifelike it is. But anyway, so it's just, that's a species for me, has a lot of meaning for a few reasons. One, because I started fishing the last year that we had a cod fishery recreationally open. And so the first year I was fishing, I was able to catch and keep cod, and then, started learning about, I participate very heavily in the ground fishery, and that was the heart of the ground fishery, which is now shifted towards haddock and pollock, which I love. They're related fish. I love fishing all of these gadiforms. I love fishing even the freshwater cusk, a close relative. When Grant and I went to Newfoundland to shoot for season 2 of the WildFed show, we got to fish cod there and learn about the history of it, and got to have cod prepared for us in a pretty cool way too. Get to eat the tongues, which, man, they are a delicacy. I mean,
melt in your mouth.
They do. They melt in your mouth, like almost like foie gras or something. Like, put it in your mouth and it just like came apart. And we had this cooked over the fire too on cast iron. And then Lori would take the heads of the cod and just sort of sprinkle of flour over them, and then put them in the pan in oil and sort of fry up the heads. And you just sort of pick all the meat off of the head. Because what was happening was, these fish would come in, they'd be filleted out for the market. And then what would be left over, tongues, heads, that stuff, was what the people would eat. The fishermen would eat, the families would eat, right? So they have like sort of ways of cooking this stuff. I mean, cod head is amongst the best things I've ever eaten. I couldn't remember me that day just picking away at that cod head. Like, I couldn't be stopped, Anyway, I love this species, so I'm really glad to commemorate it. Like I said, there's no way I'm hanging like a cod on my wall that is, taxidermied or something. It just kind of skeeves me out. But let's go back to talking a little bit about your diving, man. And your what I think is really cool is you have exploited a wild food niche. I mean, exploited in the scientific sense, not in the, kind of common parlance, but you've exploited a niche that nobody's really exploiting. When you told me you dive out of Portland, Maine, it was like, come on, are you serious? Like, and then asking you like, well, who else is doing it? And you're like, well, just like a handful of people. So it's not like cold water diving is rare in the world, but it's certainly rare in our region, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely rare here, and I think it's also, even the rod and reel fishery here is not very extensive. There's in the spring and in the fall, there's a lot of people targeting striped bass, but that's all relative. I mean, our population in Maine isn't very,
a million people.
We're tiny. So, but we have a lot of coastline. So I think even if there are a lot of people fishing, it's dispersed. But I mean, the Gulf of Maine is warming really rapidly, which from a spearfishing perspective has been really interesting. I mean, I think it's warming more rapidly than really anywhere else.
They say like more than 98% of the world's
Yeah,
waters.
so and I can see it, honestly. I mean, I have only been diving here for a few years, 4 years now, I guess, since I moved back to the Northeast, and each year, I mean, without even a year where the populations up here haven't increased, I think fish are just moving north. We have Connor, which have been here forever, which when we went spearfishing, I think is what you harvested, and then tautog, or they call them blackfish, down in southern New England, where there is a very big fishery for them, are unbelievable eating. They live in the rocks. They kind of have human-like teeth.
My neighbor Will calls them people teeth.
Yeah, it's wild.
They eat crustaceans and bivalves and stuff like that.
Yep. And you can hear them. You can hear them chomping when you're diving. You can hear them. So I even in terrible viz, I know when they're around. Because you can hear them, and you can hear with striped bass when you're diving. You can hear what we call a tail beat, which is like the cavitation of their tail when they are spooked when you're diving. So they
and for the listener, like the striped bass fishery here, I called DMR and said, you know, like, with as far as method of take is concerned, what am I allowed to do with a spear gun? And they said, well, you can't fish striped bass and you can't fish halibut.
Right.
But everything else, they said you were good to go. And so the striped bass are there, but you're not allowed to spear them, unfortunately, because it seems like that would be a really effective way to harvest.
Yeah, it's pretty much every other state in New England you can or cannot spearfish striped bass. It's interesting. And there's some heated legal debate over what the method of take laws should be, and
even in the line fishery though, it's like
you know what
I'm saying? It's like that seems to be, that's one of the places, and I hesitate to say too much because my understanding of the fishery is limited and my years of participation are extremely limited, but seems to me that here where we have a 28-inch limit on the fish, right? They got to be 28 inches or bigger.
Yep.
Seems like I would prefer to eat a sort of smaller fish because of the PCB load that they carry up from Chesapeake Bay.
Right.
And then also I feel like we're eating breeder fish when we take those, but I feel like that fishery is managed for trophies.
Yeah,
that's like frustrating.
Well, I will tell you it's changing. So this year, I don't remember the actual committee or council's name, but there is a committee on striped bass population management that's coast-wide. So it's all the states on the East Coast. Right. And they actually, I don't know if they've finalized the exact lengths or what, but there's going to be, I believe, a slot limit in all the states next year, this season. So I think it's going to be something like 28 inches to 36 or maybe 40 inches is going to be the max. So it's going to be in there somewhere, but I think they're leaving it up to each state to decide that upper limit between like 36 and 40. Okay. I don't quote me on that, but there's changes happening, and I think it's needed. I mean, I think that it's getting kind of crazy again with, I think social media's a part of it too.
Drives this quest for these
wild,
big fish, doesn't it?
Competitive thing, and I don't really, that never used to exist, you know, and that's a weird, and it's happening for spearfishing, it's happening for rod and reel,
hunting, I see it there too.
Everything. And
I even see it in mushrooming.
Oh, interesting.
It's less ego driven in mushrooming, but obviously if somebody comes across a massive maitake, it's like, you know, and I see these pictures sometime and it's weird. Like I saw one yesterday. Somebody holding this mushroom that made me feel like, well, I'm not finding any, like, I'm not good enough. You know, and it's like, dude, it's a mushroom. Relax, you know. But hunting is so driven by that, you know. And I know you've got a good friend, a childhood friend who works with Donnie Vincent, right?
Yep, William.
So, William does. So, Donnie Vincent is a hunter that I interviewed a few years ago on the Rewild Yourself podcast, filmmaker. And I think, are they on tour still promoting a film they made?
I think they're between films right now. They just got back from Alaska.
Okay. So Donnie Vincent's he seems like a pretty well-rounded hunter fisherman, but his art seems to be focused on big game hunting, mostly archery from what I've seen. But anyway, so you know a little bit about that world, and it's like same thing. It's just driven by the biggest elk, the biggest moose, the biggest deer, and it's frustrating when you're a meat hunter when you bring in an animal and you feel like, I'm not even saying that you feel inadequate, that people are acting like you didn't do good, and you're like, what are you talking about? This is going to be the best eating bear or deer or moose or whatever it is, but you feel like this embarrassment, like you don't want people to see it because they're going to be like, oh, it's not as, it just seems so dumb because that's not the goal. And I'm always joking, like, you would never go to the farm and ask them, like, hey, do you got like a 12-year-old rooster kicking around? Because I'm wanting to eat an old rooster.
Right.
It's like, no way. You want that 1-year-old or less.
That's an interesting point.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's funny when it comes down, people are like, no, I do this for the meat. It's like, oh, really? But you want that like 7-year-old 14-point buck? Because he's all connective tissue, dude. You know, like it doesn't make sense to me. And I see it like, so anyway, back to what you're saying in Instagram and Facebook are driving this feeling like you are only succeeding if you get kill these massive animals.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's having an interesting effect on the hunting and fishing community. But I also, I think where we live, it's kind of nice that there just aren't people. I mean, maybe it could change, but there's no commercial fishery here for most of the species that we target, all of the species that we target.
What else are you targeting besides tog and...
Yeah, besides tog. So tog is probably my number one species that I target, but I've literally probably dove 50 plus miles of coastline just in the southern Maine area, and maybe 5% of that, 10% of that actually is the right habitat for tog, and you don't even know that until you're underwater.
Yeah, and let me set that up a little bit. So you got cunner as well, which is a relative, very close relative of tog.
Yeah,
but not quite as nice an eater as a tog, right?
Yeah, but they really are pretty much sharing the same
qualities.
Same food, yeah.
Okay, and then, but I'm saying as far as eating quality.
Oh, eating quality, yeah.
The tog is a little firmer of the flesh, right?
Yes, definitely.
Nicer. And then you're also getting winter flounder, though, too, right?
Yeah, which, I mean, they're also, in terms of flavor, I mean, they're like any flounder. Yeah. I mean, they're prime eating. They're really, really a delicacy, but they're small flounder. It's not like summer flounder, which are in southern New England, that can get, like 12 pounds. They can get big, but our winter flounder,
the size of a dinner plate,
a 16-inch flounder is like a big flounder.
But your main species is blackfish or tautog.
Yep.
I've heard tautog, tautog, tog. A lot of people say. So, interesting thing about this fish is that we are at its northernmost range.
Yes.
And the state has not officially, though this is a heavily regulated species south of us, here it's currently not a regulated species because DMR, our Department of Marine Resources, just kind of feels like there's not enough of it here to really even develop a fishery. So it's like currently in this interesting unregulated state.
Right.
There's not a big line fishery for them because, it's a needle in a haystack because their density is so limited. But because you can see underwater, and this is sort of going back to talking about my wife a minute here, she doesn't like angling because she feels like you're looking at a glossy surface, throwing a line in, kind of just poking and hoping. Like she's like, I don't like that. I like when I'm underwater and I can see what I'm going after. So she likes underwater hunting, but not angling with rod and line. Right?
I think a lot of anglers would disagree that it's poking and hoping.
I agree. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm always trying to tell her, Yeah. But she's like, well, that's not what it looks like to me when I watch,
Right. No, I get it. I feel
agree.
kind of the same way.
Yeah.
But
okay. Well, I mean, so there's an argument to be made for, obviously, as you get better at angling, you learn to target, you learn about structure, you learn your locations and all of that. So I'm more of an angler than a diver, so I'm certainly not arguing against it. But it would be hard to target tog here because of how dispersed they are. But because you can see the habitat underwater, it's a lot easier for you to locate them, right? And fish them.
And I mean, I've gone weeks without shooting a tog, and that could be going.
Some of the ones you pull, I'm pretty impressed by.
And I think that's because a lot of the tog, there is literally no fishery here for them. They don't really have natural predators. I mean, what's going to go after a tog in a cave? The tog's bigger than any other species around here besides sharks, but they're not free swimming, in the water column. So you they don't have much to worry about, and they have plenty to eat. So they're just growing, and they come back year after year. I've seen tog in the same hole. There's some wrecks. There's some spots where I've seen the same tog. So you're not saying you pull one out, come back, and there's another one there. No, I'm saying like I have not shot a tog, and deliberately, I've consciously made a point not to shoot certain tog for various reasons, but this one in particular that I'm thinking of came back to the same exact spot 3 years in a row.
Because he leaves.
They leave. Yeah, they go to deeper water because they come in, I believe, to spawn, and then they go back out. Or
like
breed.
A lot of our species, right? It's like they split the inshore
right
during the winter,
exactly.
And then they come back.
So that's why, and because our summers are so short here. I mean, you really don't have much time to target tog. I think the 50 degree, from my experience, 50 degrees is their minimum water temperature.
Okay.
As soon as it gets below 50,
They're out of here.
They're out of here.
And the conditions. Well, actually, let me just say this too. That's a fish with a face only a mother could love. I've seen you do some tog art, and I love the style that you do it in. You know, like they're cool looking, but they're not. You know, you look at a trout or you look at a striped bass, like they're aesthetically a very beautiful fish. You look at a tog, you're like, dang, that's a ugly looking fish.
Anybody listening should Google a tog right now.
Yeah, and you look at its mouth and you're like, oh God, it looks like a little kid who's teething. You know, like his teeth are busting through the surface.
They've got big gnarly molars in the back, and they're designed for crushing shellfish.
Yeah.
But they're unbelievable eating fish, and the amount of, like another species that we dive for a lot, they're just kind of getting into Maine, but they're really down in southern New England, are black sea bass.
Yeah.
And they're voracious predators. They're invasive. They're
highly prized as culinary fish too.
Unbelievable. They taste really good. They're versatile. They're really, and there's a lot of them. Their populations are booming. There's tons of them because they eat everything. They eat baby lobsters. They eat, they're moving north. And but when you fillet a black sea bass, they're all head. There's the fillets are, proportionally to their body, the fillet that you get is pretty small.
Right.
Whereas to tog, you're getting. It's a lot of meat on a tog, which is cool because it's, you feel it, you really are, you can use most of the fish. It's,
right.
And they're all muscle and but they're slow growing. You do have to be conscious of their kind of stocks because, like, I try not to go, and I try to kind of educate my friends too, or chat with them about, if we go into a certain rock pile or a certain spot where they are, we can't wipe them all out,
right,
because you need to sustain that. They grow slowly. Yeah. They're slow growing fich.
Okay. So in other words, they're old if you get a big one.
Yeah. So it's not like a mahi where they reach like full maturity in a year or something, and it's a different kind of fish that does require some delicate treatment, and I think and they're fished hard in southern New England. Rod and reel on crab usually, right? Yes, rod and reel, like New Jersey, Rhode Island, that whole area. It's like there's people that all they do is fish for tog.
And I gotta say, that's one of those fisheries where I just can't imagine the amount of tackle that's in line that's left.
You see it. I dive the same wrecks that the guys are fishing
because you're bouncing a green crab or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And some weight, and trying to get your bait down into like holes in the rock and caves, and you're constantly breaking off.
I'll go down
fluorocarbon or monofilament with hooks and lead weights and leaving them there.
Right.
So it's kind of cool what you're able to do because you're not leaving all that waste behind in the sea.
Exactly. I'd be having a bad season in terms of tog if I lost a shaft for my spear gun the whole season. That's pretty rare to actually lose it to a point where I can't go retrieve it. Whereas some of these wrecks that I dive on in Rhode Island and down in southern New England, you dive on them and it's just a mess down there.
You see all that.
Lead everywhere. There's certain pieces of metal you can barely even tell that it's metal because there's so much mono wrapped around it.
Wow.
So it's a problem. But there's also
especially with fluoro, because fluoro doesn't really break down, right? Like the way that mono breaks down, but fluoro lasts a long time in the water.
Yeah. But mono still, even though it's breaking down, it's still microplastics.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're eating the mussels and clams.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things that's the most appealing to me about free diving and spearfishing is you don't have this whole out of sight, out of mind kind of. There is a barrier between when you're rod and reel fishing on the surface, anything that happens under the surface. Even my family are commercial fishermen. None of them have ever seen even 3 feet under the surface
That's
don't.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah, it's a different world, and you get a whole different perspective
when you're up
down
top
there.
fishing. And if you're listening and you're an angler, you probably can relate to this. It's like you have in your mind like a imagination of what's going on under there, and what your line is doing under there, and what your hook and your terminal tackle is doing under there. Then you go down and you're like, oh, this is I mean, if you were and I were in a boat angling right now, your understanding of what's happening under is going to be actually informed by experience of seeing. Also, fish behavior when you're down there and you're like, oh, that's what the fish are doing. It's like it's different than what you imagine fish are doing. And sometimes it's wild how they're just around and they're ignoring they're not liking your presentation, or they're coming up near your presentation, but they're not going for it or whatever. And you're sitting there thinking there's no fish around, or maybe you're in a place where there actually aren't any fish.
Oh, yeah.
It's just interesting when you're down there, right?
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, I think this is, there's always going to be this contentious relationship between rod and reel fishermen and spear fishermen, and spear fishermen are doing this, to the ocean, and rod and reel fishermen are doing this to the ocean. And I just think you can't put rod and reel fishermen, catch and release or not, and spear fishermen into these kind of stereotypes, because the people who do these sports, I think for the most part, are spear fishermen probably are very conservation minded, and so are all catch and release rod and reel. Yeah, that is exactly, yeah.
All different approaches.
So all different approaches, I think, and different disciplines have different kinds of people that are in it for different reasons. Right. I mean, and it's just really interesting. It's hard to even talk about one being necessarily. I do think spearfishing though is extremely sustainable.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're making the right decisions, because
I think that's it. If the decisions are being, because you could do a lot of damage to a fishery too, and I think that is denied in a lot of the rhetoric that the spearfishing community has, because they'll almost get like a no, like what we do is perfect kind of a thing, where it's like, well, you can get in there and really destroy a reef too if you wanted to.
Right, by selecting the largest.
Yeah.
Because you can literally go down in one day. You could take out the biggest breeders in a section of the reef,
That's what my neighbor complains about when he would fish down in like Cape Hatteras, and he was saying like, they'd have these areas where they would fish, and he claims, I mean, it's like one of these things, you hear all this kind of stuff back and forth like you were just saying, but as an angler, he would feel like spear fishermen would come in there and kind of wipe out that fishery, and then it wouldn't be like any fun to fish in anymore because they weren't catching anything good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can just see these different arguments.
Hey, we'll get right back to the show in a moment, but first, despite the fact that I stay really up to date on advancements in gear and equipment, when it comes to gathering plants, mushrooms, and yes, lichens too, I really like to use a wooden basket. And it's not just nostalgia about bygone days, it's because even in the 2020s, it's still the optimal tool for the job. Baskets are semi-rigid, so they protect delicate leaves, buds, flowers, fruits, and fungi, but they also have flex, making them very comfortable to carry and live around compared to a bucket or plastic bin. Now you could try using a backpack, but unless it's got a rigid container inside of it, it tends to crush any delicate plant or fungal material you gather. And unlike a pack, bucket, or bin, baskets breathe, allowing air in and heat and moisture out. Most pack baskets are extremely expensive, and making them yourself, while very rewarding, is a specialty skill most of us don't have. If you're looking for a beautiful, functional custom pack basket, check out my buddy Corey Slater on Instagram. His handle is @ADKBaskets. That's ADK Baskets. He makes your pack to order, so you'll have lots of color and design options, and each one is a work of art. In fact, I store mine decoratively when they're not being used. Tell him we sent you or use the coupon code WildFed, and he'll give you $20 off your order. Now, he turns these orders around really fast too, so you'll be foraging with your pack basket within a couple weeks. Better still, he ships free in the continental US. I had Corey make me 4 matching baskets, 2 pack baskets, 1 large one and 1 small one, as well as a blicky. That's a basket that hangs off your belt in front so you can drop fruits or leaves while you're harvesting directly into it, rather than holding it, freeing up both of your hands to gather. I also had him make me a creel, which is a small basket you wear over your shoulder that has a slot in the lid to drop trout or other small fish into while you're out catching them. All four are a matched set that's ultra functional, but also very, very beautiful. Again, it's ADK Baskets on Instagram. That's Alpha Delta Kilo Baskets, ADK Baskets. Tell Corey I sent you, and he'll give you $20 off your order. Now, back to the show.
Grant and I did a bit of angling this year for striped bass from my boat, and the way that I'm targeting them now is definitely informed by seeing them underwater, seeing the way that the schools will come through or individuals will be patrolling around the rocks. Having visually seen that underwater changes the way that I fish to them, and it's so valuable. Like, I just think anglers would be benefited so much by one dive just to see the fish behavior instead of imagining what the fish behavior is. And I know that a lot of anglers are very advanced in their practice, but wow, changes things quite a bit. I also want to talk a little bit about the conditions here, because I went out diving with you out of the sort of Portland area, and I think we were diving in about 30 feet of water. And I've described this to a few different people, because I've been able to dive down in Florida and Bahamas and Belize and stuff like that, where you got really clear conditions, beautiful water temperature. Here it's cold. So first of all, the suits that we're wearing are pretty thick, and I find you have a pretty cool suit there, that like double lined suit. Looks a little cozier than that open. What do they call that? That open
cell.
Yeah, that open cell suit that I'm wearing. But we dive down, so you got just your face exposed, and I'm not so bothered by the cold, but yeah, it's definitely cold. And you hit that thermocline as you dive down, where you're like,
it's even
here's
colder.
the line where it really gets cold. Like, suddenly the water temperature just changes at a line there, the thermocline. But when we were diving, I've seen conditions a few ways, but I'm going to talk about one day in particular where it was like not just cloudy, but was so much like algae debris, seaweed bits in the water column that as I dove down for about 27 feet or so, it was just purple and green junk. And then you'd hit this line where all of a sudden it's clear for like the next, 5 or 6 feet down to the bottom. So you get down to the bottom and it's clear and you can see really well, but you have this column of stuff that's like as thick as milk above you that if you were prone to claustrophobia would be a little uncomfortable, because between you and your next breath is this just dark, like you look up and it's not like you see the sun up there, you see the surface, you just see this mess that you got to like push up through. So it's cold, which I think must cut a lot of people out of it, but it's also, the clarity's not real great, right? So you're diving in conditions that a lot of people are just not, I don't think you're going to have a lot of competition.
Well, yeah, it's eerie. It's eerie at first for sure, but it's also all relative. It's all what you're used to.
Yep.
It's like the people who surf up here. You know, we have a serious surfing community, but our surfing's really gnarly.
And it's in the winter.
You have to go, and it's cold and can be really miserable sometimes, but the diving's pretty similar. It's like but if you go a lot, you have to go to know, and you go a lot, and it really pays off, and you'll have days where you don't have an algae bloom, and you can see top to bottom 30 feet, and it's a magical experience, and you take advantage of that day, and you stay in the water until your hands are numb and your feet are numb, and
right.
And that's when it's really is all worth it. But I've had friends come who dive and even teach free diving in like Hawaii and around the world, and they're so spoiled with their crystal clear viz and warm water, and then they come up here, and some of these people, they can dive 130 feet and then they come up here, and hard diving, you'd be hard pressed to find a spot that holds fish here until you get real deep where you'd see haddock and stuff. Most of the fish are under 30 feet probably. And I've had people come up here and come diving with me, and it really messes with
it's definitely
you
psychological.
with, they're just diving into murk. And it's like, if you're diving into murk and you're not used to it, you could be the most talented diver around, and you're going to shut down.
It reminds me of like
what
Star Trek
happens.
or Star Wars, where they go into like warp drive, and as you're going straight down, the way the algae's coming past
Yep.
your face, it's just like you're traveling through interstellar space, and it's just like zooming past you. And then just like in Star Wars, it's like they go into what do they call it in Star Wars? They go, I'm like, I hate that I'm doing this
Is
and
it not
mixing
warp
Star Trek and
speed? I
Star
don't know.
anyway, whatever it is. Like they go that rapid speed, and then they get there and they slow right down. It's like that you're going through that algae, and it's just going past your eyes, past your mask, and then all of a sudden you hit this clear spot, and it's just super clear.
And it can be a lot of things. It could be algae, but it could be runoff from a big storm we just had. It could be sediment from, the swell turning up the sand or whatever. But it's just it's an interesting spot, because not only do you have the visibility thing, you have the water temperature thing, and there's several things that
And
make
not to mention that it's not, like we were saying, it's not like we have coral and reefs and
there's
massive biodiversity.
and there aren't that many fish.
That's it. So you also have, that's another condition.
And don't get me wrong, I just got back from a trip to Mexico to dive. It's like I still seek out other places to experience their diving too. But it's our home ocean, and it's like I do think that we have a lot of similarities to diving in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, I've done some diving out there, and water temperature is pretty similar. Yeah. Visibility can be pretty similar, but real quick on what you were talking about with the murk, down in Rhode Island, there's a spot we dive, and you'll dive down. It's about 40 feet, and you dive down this big concrete pillar, and you dive down, and it's pitch black. I mean, you literally, if you hold your hand 8 inches in front of your face, you can't see it. That's how dark it is. So you keep your gun right out in front of your face, but you've got 40 feet down. So you just start kicking. You go down. The last, I would say, 4 feet of the water column on the bottom is crystal clear, like the Bahamas.
Yeah.
Like crystal clear with a roof
And there's
of
light.
black murk.
How is
above
there
you.
light? It's
Well,
coming from where
not much from the outside, from either
and
side.
That pillar is so you know what direction you're going?
Yeah, I mean, it's just to make. I
Guides
mean,
you
it's
down.
not bright down there,
Yeah.
but the water
You
is
can
crystal
see.
clear,
Yeah.
and there's fish moving around. And the reason is because it's a mussel bed. The whole bottom
filtering
is
it.
all mussels,
Yeah.
so they can filter about clearly 4 feet of water up to, and it's universal. I mean, the mussels are the whole bottom.
Okay.
And there's fish all over the place down there, but that's what I mean about you don't with spearfishing. It's not like surfing where you got surf cams and you can sit on your couch and see what the ocean's doing. I always joke
To
about
check conditions,
having
you
a
mean.
viz cam, because it's like you've got to go diving to
know
find
what it's
out
gonna be like
what's
that
going
day.
on. And sometimes even up here, above the thermocline, can't see anything. Second you get below the thermocline, whatever that is, it I don't know why, but the algae separates or whatever right there, and then you get below that thermocline, and sometimes you'll have 15 feet of viz.
Right.
But you don't know that
Till you're out there.
until you go. Most people would look over the side of the boat and say there's no point in diving because the viz is terrible.
Right. I really think it's cool, just like we were saying about Tog, we're at the northern part of their range.
Yeah.
I just think it's cool with American spearfishing, you're sort of operating at the northernmost part of the range of spearfishers.
Oh, yeah.
Here, at least.
And I think most people would say we're beyond the range, too. I mean, you talked to DMR like you were talking about, and
they're like, oh, we don't even care.
they
'cause it's not
laughed
worth
at me the
regulating.
first time I called the DMR, and one of the officers that was out on duty said, I said, I've been seeing a lot of Tog here, can I take them spearfishing? Is that legit? And he said, he kind of laughed at me and he said, we don't have Tog here. He said we have cunner. He said, you must be thinking of cunner. It's a cunner. And I was like, no, I know exactly what a Tog looks like, and I've got 2 of them in my cooler right now,
Right.
And he was like, well, he clearly didn't. He was taking what I was saying with a grain of salt, and then he said, it's fine. He said, it's striped bass and and halibut are like
what we're protecting here.
They really don't want spear fishermen. I mean, anybody who's diving deep enough to hit halibut anyways, probably not living on the coast of Maine, but so it's just, we live in this interesting place where I don't think that it's all uncharted here in terms of
I just love that, because if you want to get into deer hunting, let's say, you got massive amount of pressure, lots and lots of hunters coming not just from here but from out of state.
Yeah.
So you got this population of deer who are dealing with tremendous hunting pressures, and you have to penetrate into a world where you have a tremendous amount of, I guess, competitive forces. You know, if you want to moose hunt, if you want to bear hunt, like, it's not like you're walking into an underexploited niche. But with this, what's so cool about it to me is that you're not out there. Now, there's less resources, but you're not out there like trying to, it's not even like with surfing. Like, you know, you go down to a Gunkwit Beach and you want to get on that break in front of the river. Like, you got the locals there who are like, this is my wave, bro. But this isn't like that. You're not like in somebody's spot. There's just nobody doing it.
Right.
I just think that's really neat.
And there is something too between, it's that common respect and intrigue of the ocean that I think brings surfers to spearfishing and spearfishing to surfers, spearfishermen to surfers, because the tiny community divers that I know here in Maine are, mostly hopped on board after I kind of figured out a little bit of the groundwork, and then they all hopped on because you need dive buddies. You really shouldn't be diving solo. So
you ready for this, Grant? Dylan spearheaded it.
Oh man. But anyway, most of the people that I spearfish with are surfers when they're swell.
Yeah.
And then when it's flat, they still want to interact with the ocean. Yeah. And what better way to do it than freediving? So
it is hard to buddy up here, man. I noticed, like, when you dive down, I'd be like, well, there he's gone. I can't see him.
Yeah.
It's not like diving down in the South where it's like, I can just watch you and swim sort of over top of you. I wait for my, Avani and I will be dive buddies, and I can just kind of stay with her and see her silhouette at least down below, and I just wait for her. I make sure I am where she's surfacing, and vice versa.
One up, one down.
Yeah. You went down, I remember the first time, and I was like, oh. I don't know where you are.
Well, and it's difficult. I mean, kind of one of the authorities on spearfishing safety is immersion freediving. If you want to learn anything about freedive safety or technique or anything, Ted Hardy, with immersion freediving, is like, he's just such a wealth of knowledge, and has online videos and stuff that help a lot with breath hold and recovery from shallow water blackout and safety situations. And he came up, he was doing a live web thing, and he was talking about the buddy system, diving, and always being within reach of your buddy when they come up, so that within you need to be right window. On them.
What I learned was, like, your buddy comes up, they say I'm okay, and then you hang with them 30 seconds before you decide they're okay.
Right, because they could be having a loss of motor control, or at worst, then they go into an actual blackout situation, which that's a whole nother. I mean, my knowledge is limited, but I know enough that, if something were to happen to, my buddy, I could hopefully save him. But
have either one of you witnessed that before?
I haven't, just in videos. But a lot of the people that I dive with, one of my close buddies here is a free dive instructor professionally. He grew up in Freeport, and it's still kind of his home base. But I mean, he's constantly traveling to teach free diving all year round. You would actually he's a great resource, knows so much about diving. But I think that you need to, like, that's what makes me nervous about promoting this sport in Maine, where we have so few. I guess this is what I was trying to get at, but we have so few resources. So thank goodness for the internet, because there are avenues where you can learn a lot in a short period of time without taking a class, even though I still highly recommend taking. I've taken a free dive class, and I think that's honestly the way to do it, because then you have a lot of practical stuff. And
I was going to say, there's 2 certifications that I'm aware of right now. So it's like if you're into scuba, you know, everybody goes and gets PADI 1 to start, and that's how you get a certification in scuba, and they recognize that if you decide you're going to go dive in Mexico, you're going to go dive in the Caribbean, wherever you're diving, they recognize those certifications. Now, the freediving certifications and spearfishing certifications are relatively new. They're not necessarily universally acknowledged, but they're becoming
they
that,
are now.
right?
Yeah. So there. PFI and FII.
Okay, I think I have FII is what I have.
Yeah. So PFI and FII are like the 2.
I'm so glad I did that.
Different certifications.
I'm so glad. I went down with Florida freedivers.
Yep. Yeah, they're awesome.
And I got a great course out of that. I got some good experience. They got me down to 65 feet my first weekend.
Yeah, usually freedive level 1. That's what they'll get you to, is like 60, 65
And it was just, I mean, I'm really grateful that I did that, because I could see how, and, you know, and that's like doing hunter safety or anything like that. It's just good to get a safety background, because there are obviously inherent risks.
Right.
Yeah.
And back to our original, we were talking about the visibility and how challenging it is to do the buddy system, 1 up, 1 down, in those conditions. Somebody brought that up to Ted Hardy in one of the live videos that I was watching, and he said that he has a lot of friends in the Northeast, and the best solution that they had come up with would be to dive with a float line, with no float attached to the end. Yeah. So a float line is just a buoyant line that you would attach to the butt of your gun or pole spear, or if you're just freediving, you could even just hold on to it. Yeah. But it's a buoyant line, and he was saying, you know, to use that, dive with it, and then at least you on the surface will know what direction I'm headed.
Why no buoy?
You could have a buoy on the end. Because when I dove with you,
what we had was the same buoy that I had when I was a lifeguard. Like, I have like one of those hard buoys.
Yep.
Looks like, you know, the Baywatch thing, except that it has a dive flag sticking off it. And then I have a float line, which is like a hollow plastic tube.
Right.
That's I don't remember how long mine is. I think it's like about 100 feet. It's a long one. And then that's connected to my spear gun. So when I'm down there, everywhere I go, there's almost like no resistance. I don't feel that buoy on the water.
They make them really hydrodynamic.
Yeah, so it just moves with me, but like you could always find me by following down my line.
By following that. And that's a great way to dive, especially in New England. We also dive with reels on our guns, which I would say you almost here want to double up if you're going to do that, because if you're going to practice the buddy, you know, 1 up, 1 down, you want to be able to see your buddy. You really do need a float line to be able to do that. Yeah. And you could definitely have a float on the end of it, especially if you're shore diving and you want, you know, the float to have your stringer on.
I was going to say, what I like about what you were doing too is you ran a stringer for your fish on your buoy.
Yep.
So you'd get a fish, bring it up, run that stringer through its gills and its mouth, and leave them all. So all of your fish are sort of hanging on your buoy.
Right.
And that way, too, for boaters or anybody else on the water, jet skis, they see your buoy, they see your dive flag, they know you're down there.
Right. And the buoy has a big dive flag that's really prominent on it. And then also the fact that we are able to dive with a stringer is kind of a luxury here, because a lot of places you can't because of sharks. But we don't really have. I mean,
so explain that to people. In other words, you've got a stringer of fish on your belt. Let's say.
That's bleeding. You know, could potentially you bleed your fish, so you're essentially it's just like a big beacon.
Chum.
You know, so granted you're probably going to be at least, depending on the length of your float line, you're going to be at least 30 feet away from that float. But I still don't really want to be
who wants that,
30
though?
feet away from a feeding shark, you know.
Right.
But we're just there are a lot of things that we can be fortunate, you know, be thankful for up here in terms of sharks. And, you know, it's a pretty easy, the barrier of entry in Maine, despite the temperature, despite the visibility, it's a pretty tame place to get into diving.
True.
I mean, it's shallow. A lot of places in the country and in the world, it's sand for miles and miles and miles, so you need a boat. You know, that's the case in Florida and a lot of places. So shore diving isn't really a possibility.
Get out to reef or
exactly.
whatever. Yeah.
And then other places, it just, like where I was in Mexico, you're in blue water like instantly, which
Yeah.
blue water is just, basically the there's no bottom. It's hundreds of feet,
Yeah. And it's an eerie
maybe
feeling.
thousands of feet.
That's a
And-
weird feeling.
Yeah, and that happens straight off of shore there. So there's not a whole lot of, you're going straight into pelagic species, like, species that spend their whole lives, in
Tuna,
the upper
mahi,
part of the
wahoo.
water column in hundreds and thousands of feet of water, like mahi and wahoo and marlin and tuna. So I think we do live in a really...
And we don't have a lot of dangerous marine animals, as you were alluding to before.
No, we're pretty... We really, I would say it's a great place to get into it, but do your research beforehand, because there are resources now.
Yeah,
but,
and take a class, I think, is where I would tell
agree.
somebody, start off, take a class, and then go out with somebody who can mentor you if you can.
Exactly. I mean, I've tried to... The most beneficial things for me have been taking a class and just surrounding myself by people who have been diving
For
much
me to go out
longer
with
than
you
I
was
have.
like, okay, you kind of saved me 1,000 hours of having to try to figure stuff out here. Honestly, I mean, I do want to talk a little bit about diving and breath work, and in particular, I want to talk about personality types, because like no one has ever accused me of being like a really chilled out dude. I never get that. No one's ever like, dude, he's so chill. And in fact, one of my good friends, Mark, he always tells me I have no chill. He's like, dude, you have no chill. You just don't have you don't have that setting or whatever that's like broken on you. And diving is this interesting, it's an endeavor where you can't work harder to make it work. Like the other day I took a yoga class with my wife, right? And there's this dude in the corner of the room, and he is working so hard that you just hear every pose. And I want to be like, dude, if you relax into the pose, you're going to be fine. But you're fighting your own nervous system. You know what I mean? Where you're contracting muscles you're trying to lengthen. Like you can't do yoga like that. Similarly, it's about relaxing into, at least my experience with diving, it's about relaxing. And that can be hard for some people. It's definitely hard for me. You're a super chill dude. You're like, every time I've been around you, it's like kind of one pace is like real chill. Do you find that amongst the divers who are good divers and productive spearfishers? Because, I'm thinking about this talk that I think it might be a TED talk that Kimmy Werner gave, where she says, when you feel the need to speed up, slow down, I think is what she says. And that's just this thing where I'm like, I want to integrate that in my nervous system, but it's not there yet. And when I was diving with you, I noticed I go down to the bottom, I get a little panicky, then I want to like move around really fast, fish dart away from me, then I come up and grab a breath, and you'd be down there just chilling. So what's your experience
I mean,
with
I
that?
think most of our diving here too, there's different techniques in different places and different styles of diving for different applications. But I think here, you do have to kind of seek tog. They're
seeking us, and you have to go hunt
you
for
do
them.
have to hunt a little bit, which most spear fishermen and most varieties of hunting, it's honestly is just kind of waiting. Like you want to get down to the bottom, you want to
tuck in a little bit.
You want to kick as little as you need to and just coast the rest, because we're wearing weight belts. So to counteract our buoyancy of our wetsuits and everything. So most of the time, once you're past the depth that you're weighted to be neutrally buoyant, you're actually, sinking.
Negatively buoyant.
Which is okay, because most shallow water blackouts, like I don't know the exact percentage, but it's in the 90 percentile of shallow water blackouts happen in like the top 6 feet or 10 feet of the water column. So, which is the big fear in freediving, is shallow water blackout. So, here, you get past a point, and then you can literally, it's like the Mission Impossible, but you just float. You're just
in other words, you don't
gliding.
have to work to
You're
stay
gliding.
down there, though.
Exactly. Yeah. So because the whole thing with diving is you're on your own breath. So you have one breath, and you can choose to use that breath however you want. And if you're kicking more than you need to kick, or if you're, even just looking, like if you're swinging your head back and forth, like that's using oxygen, and if you can,
and creating carbon dioxide,
right?
Because that real need, the need is often more to exhale than it is to even inhale.
The
right?
initial,
to get rid of that carbon dioxide.
This is all just coming, what I remember from my freedive class, but the initial urge to breathe is typically it's more carbon dioxide buildup in your system than your body's used to.
Right.
The later symptoms, if you push past that, which you should, if you want to advance your freediving, and you shouldn't do it until you've had some education on it, but that's kind of the phase I'm at, is pushing through those initial, what we call contractions, which is your body feeling like there's too much.
That's when your diaphragm
sensing
starts going,
that. Yeah, exactly. So that's your body saying, hey, there's
underwater.
What's all this carbon dioxide, in my body. But you think that, to us, that appears as, that shows itself as the urge to breathe.
Right.
But then if you can move through those initial sets of contractions, then you kind of move into the symptoms of hypoxia, or not having enough oxygen. And that's where things start to kind of get, like once you start having loss of motor control or things like that, then you're moving into like a dangerous territory,
I want to break some of that down. So, and let's talk about we'll talk in a second about how the breathing works, but when it comes to overcoming those contractions, so what you're talking about is you feel it in your diaphragm, like in your abdomen, upper abdomen, where you start to get these involuntary contractions.
Exactly. And that's when most people bail.
Yeah.
That's when most people say,
understandably,
right,
especially in the beginning, because you're like still like learning about this. You're pushing a boundary you didn't grow up pushing or whatever.
Right.
Like the guy in the yoga class, you it's not a thing you control by squeezing and compressing it down, right? So many things we learn to control, we control with effort. But that's like a thing you relax into, correct?
Yeah.
Would you say
that?
that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everything in freediving is something you relax into.
I
mean, I think
the
first thing, even I've been diving for a long time now, and for whatever reason, sometimes your heart rate's a little higher than other times. Sometimes you're a little more fired up than other times, because maybe there's something going on in some other aspect of your life, or something that you're thinking about that's having an effect on your whole system. And so sometimes what I have to do is just dive down. And this was a tip from another, I just got to throw it out there too, another amazing podcast if you want to learn anything about spearfishing. The best resource that I've found is called the Noobs Bureau. It's a great podcast.
Out of Australia, right?
I believe they are. Yeah, New Zealand or else. Yeah, Australia. And they have just unbelievable, every episode they have some world-renowned spearfisherman or freediver.
It's a great show.
Come on. Ted Hardy's been on there several times. And there's just so much knowledge to be had there. But anyway, I think you just, even, I learned from somebody, just dive down and crash the bottom slowly, and then become one with the rocks. That's what I typically do, especially if you're hunting striped bass. They can even see your eye movements. So they tell you, when you're hunting, great striped bass spearfishermen will tell you that when you land on the bottom, you can even sense them, and you can see them in your peripheral, but they're curious by nature, so they're going to circle you. So don't even move your eyes. Just stay looking straight, be completely still and relaxed, and then you wait for your opportunity. And that's when so the first thing I do when I crash the bottom is just close my eyes. Just completely close my eyes, and that's one of several techniques that will naturally lower your heart rate. And just get you into this really relaxed state.
Man, I feel that on the land, because when an animal, say a deer or a turkey, comes in, with bears, usually because I hunt with dogs, it's different. It's like they know you're there, you're crashing in with all these animals. But with deer, with turkeys, it's like I imagine I'm a stone or something. Like I don't want to move the whites of my eyes, like you said, and I don't ever look at them directly. Like I look at them in my peripheral vision with like a diffuse gaze.
Yeah.
Because it's like if I even like give any intention, it's like they sense whatever they're sensing is so fast. And fish having that lateral line, and then you're in their medium of liquid water, everything you transmit.
You're
to
in
them,
their
right?
world.
Yeah.
And no matter how graceful you are, you still look like an outsider. They know.
Yeah.
They're fish are so smart. They're so aware.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And I mean, Tog, it's debatable how aware they are sometimes, but the striped bass, I mean, they're hunters. They know. They know what's going on, and it's really hard to get your opportunity on a striped bass and knowing that striped bass populations are not, historically are not very good. I maybe will take 3 a year. Yeah. I'm very selective with striped bass specifically, but
I took 2 last year.
Yeah. And then 1 striped bass. I mean, you could feed.
They're so good though.
Grant
did a fish stock for me off the carcass of one from this year. Man, that was a nice stock, Grant. One thing I would say is if you gave me a person off the street, I think day one I could get them on land. I don't mean underwater, but no problem getting somebody to hold their breath 3 minutes.
Yeah.
You set them on a yoga mat and you sort of talk them through the breathing.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that really blew my mind.
Serious time with them. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like most people, if you said, let's see how long you can hold your breath, and then you walk them through some of these breathing techniques, it's pretty incredible how quickly you can advance. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your sort of breathe up and how you do that, and kind of anything you've learned that works for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I use, there's actually some cool apps now out there that can help you with O2 tables, which are kind of a way to train you. There's CO2, there's carbon dioxide tables, and then there's O2 tables, and one kind of trains your body to tolerate more CO2 over time. It kind of trains your body to extend that period of time, and then O2 tables kind of train your body to go longer without oxygen. From my understanding, that I always cringe a little bit because I really think of some freedive instructor listening to this or something and calling me out. But so I'll do those. But I mean,
but your basic breathing. Describe basic
breathing. So when I do a dive, I'm on the surface. We all have a mammalian dive reflex, which is, very for like all marine mammals have it. So whales have it, sea lions, all these species have a mammalian dive reflex. Theirs is much more pronounced and developed than ours is. But when you get in the water,
face in the water,
there's a lot of sensors in your face that basically register, wow, I'm in water right now, and my body needs to make some changes to adapt to be ready for that environment. So and actually shallow water blackout is also it's your body saving you from drowning, and that's part of your mammalian.
When you have a shallow water blackout, they say you typically have like a 10 or 20% oxygen reserve still in place, right?
Because you haven't drowned. I mean, drowning is the end all be all. Right. Shallow water blackout, if somebody sees you black out, and that's why you dive into buddy system. If somebody sees you black out, which is in the Caribbean or in Hawaii or where there's really good visibility, and a lot of times people there are diving really deep because that's where the reef is. If somebody catches you and they see it happen and they know the signs of a shallow water blackout, and they can dive down, grab you, bring you to the surface, get you on your back,
because your body stops. It's not like you inhale water. Your body knows better, right? Your glottis is shut.
That's the effect of this mammalian dive reflex. Yeah, exactly. So your body's saying, we've got this much oxygen left. I'm going to shut down this body and then close the esophagus, and when you
trachea,
and then when you come up to the surface, you need to protect that airway at all times. Right. Keep that out of the water. Get the person on their back, remove their mask, and then you're trying to let the body know it's out of the water. So there's an auditory element to it. So you're saying you can say whatever, say their name over and over again, wake up. You're blowing. If you can
Air,
blow
wind
air
across their
so
face, right?
if you can blow across their face, and they will wake up. They will come back once the body realizes it's no longer underwater and it's safe to breathe again. It will do it.
Yeah.
But if no one's watching, I mean, it's game
Eventually
over.
you drown.
Yeah, because your body. Yeah, so that's a part of the mammalian dive reflex, but the kind of upfront part of the mammalian dive reflex is your body is making certain adaptations, like pulling
slower heart rate,
pulling blood from the extremities into the inner part of your body. There's I don't really know all the intricacies of it, but your body makes some changes. The first thing I do, get in the water, give myself about 5 minutes face down, just with my face in the water. I typically...
You have a snorkel, so you can continue breathing.
So you're breathing,
okay.
yeah.
A lot of people aren't realizing that.
It's true. We didn't really talk about gear
so
at all.
You're wearing fins that are longer than scuba fins.
So
these
super
are pretty
efficient.
long fins.
Super efficient.
Because you're swimming basically straight down.
Right.
You're wearing a wetsuit,
Yep.
potentially gloves, boots, and then you're wearing a mask and a snorkel that you spit out when you dive, but at the surface allows you, because that's the whole thing. You feel that mammalian dive reflex if you just jump in your shower and have cold water running, it hits your face and you instantly gasp, hold a breath, and then your body's physiology changes really quickly to adapt, right? So it's
an
snorkel,
amazing thing.
It's pretty cool, and it brings up that thing about the aquatic ape theory, some really neat stuff about human origins that I just think is fascinating, but I'm not saying I'm an advocate. I just think it's interesting. But the snorkel allows you, like you said, to rest belly down, prone in the water, face in the water, and still be able to slowly breathe.
Right. So then you're face down. I'm just slowly breathing. No real pattern to it. Just deep breaths, face down. And during that whole time, my body is kind of going through that. It's adapting to being in the water. And then finally, when I feel ready, and a lot of times my eyes are closed for that part too, just because I don't want any extra sensory. Right? I'd rather just not be visually processing anything. And then once it's time for my dive, I usually take 3 kind of final big breaths, and then that last one, probably my first or the last 2 are just the upper part of my diaphragm, and then when I take that last final breath, I'm actually breathing with the lower part of my diaphragm and push it, which most people, when you're breathing on a day-to-day basis, you're not using a big part of your lung capacity.
I cut diaphragms out of a lot of mammals, so I get to look at how they're staged
See how
inside.
it works,
And I always think of it, it's a muscle that's shaped like an umbrella when it's, up in your rib cage. But I think of it working like a bellows, like you used to see for, when you take a bellows and you'd open that up before you'd press it down and blow the air out. When you open it up, it sucks air into the top of the bellows. So when you drop that diaphragm out by breathing into your lower belly, as they'll say, that's what you're talking about, right?
And that's all muscle control, to be able to pull that extra air down, because you really want a full
lower lung
you
load.
Need to fill your whole, and apparently the lower part of your diaphragm is much more efficient at pulling oxygen from the air anyway that you're breathing. So that is, you really should be filling that part of your diaphragm when you're diving. And then, so I'll take that final breath. I'm completely trying to fill my whole,
but in a pretty relaxed way, because one of the things that I learned in my class was to be careful about using accessory muscles. So when you breathe, you've got your diaphragm,
right?
Then you've got your intercostals. Those are the muscles between the ribs. And then you've got the scalenes in your neck that lift your upper ribs and collarbone, right? So I can take a breath. If you watch somebody who's stressing out, they're breathing with all those accessory muscles. You'll see it high in the chest, right? And then when somebody's relaxed, the breathing's drop down into the belly. And you can use this to make yourself, if you're going into a fighter going into the ring, you use those accessory muscles right before the bell, get yourself amped up, get your adrenaline cranked, your blood pressure goes up. The opposite's what you're trying to do when you dive is slow all that down.
Belly breathing.
Not use those accessory muscles.
So it's really using that lower part.
I say it because I just picture again that guy in the yoga class, the idea that you could try to force a heavy big breath.
I mean, that's like hyperventilate. Like, you do
do
not want to hyperventilate. You don't. It still should be a pretty natural course of breathing. You don't want to trick your body into thinking. I mean, you can. I mean, I think that the top level freedivers do use a lot of weird techniques like that and try to, they're doing some wild stuff. But they have safety divers, scuba divers with them. And
you see these guys who are doing it in the pool, those breath holds where they're going like 20 plus minutes.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Right? I'm saying that accurately too, right? Over 20 minutes? Yeah, 22
wild.
minutes. Now, they do a few things, like they'll breathe oxygen before they do it. So they'll hyperoxygenate themselves, and then they also blow off carbon dioxide, like he's saying about hyperventilating. So you're exhaling rapidly and blowing off carbon dioxide so that as you slowly metabolize and build up carbon dioxide, there's less. But yeah, they're in the pool. They've got usually a nose plug and a mask. And they're just sitting at the edge of the pool, hands on the edge of the pool.
But they have a serious team there.
Yeah,
for
these are like Olympic athletes, basically.
That's why spearfishing. I mean, you're really doing when you're spearfishing, you're doing two totally separate things at once. It's the sport of freediving that you're practicing, but then you're also hunting.
Yeah,
and I think that some people, I dive with people who are unbelievable hunters, but they're freediving. Limits them. They can't, they can't go particularly deep. Maybe their breath hold isn't that long, but they know how to hunt. And maybe that comes like my buddy William. Yeah. I mean, he also is a pretty good freediver too, but he just understands how to hunt animals better than really anyone I know. I mean, he's unbelievable. So I learn a lot about the hunting side of things from him.
Right.
But then I have people I dive with that can dive 120 feet, but they're not terribly, they don't do very well in terms of understanding fish behavior and or even people, something that a lot of people don't think about is fish identification. They don't think about that until they're down there.
That's a great point, especially because you're down. It's not like you're just down there and you could stay forever, like as if you were, not forever, but it's not like you're down there with a tank where you can hang out. You see a fish. And there's this clock ticking, in your ability to stay there with it, right? So you get this sort of, I could just see how mistakes get made, or fish get shot you don't mean to shoot, or an urgency to try to chase something. All that stuff's happening because you feel that limited time that you have.
Well, and that's been something that's great, like a kind of byproduct of my artwork is that I've just seen so many different photographs and different perspectives on different kinds of fish and different species that I feel completely competent diving, honestly, in most parts of this country, whether it be the Northeast, the Southeast.
From an identification
perspective. So I feel like I could fly to California and, out there you're hunting for, Northern California, Oregon, you're hunting lingcod and rockfish and stuff. And then you go, I feel like that's one thing that I can go there and I'm not going to have to think about that.
One of the interesting things about fish identification underwater, though, is that fish don't look the same underwater.
No, not at all.
Man, you get in their environment, fish almost are like translucent underwater. Yeah. Their colors are different. The first time you see a species you've line caught before, man, as soon as they come out of the water, it's like a different creature, right?
Yeah, like black sea bass are a good example of that. When you see black sea bass on the surface, all their fins are splayed out, and they have these unbelievable colors, blues, and they're just beautiful fish. And they're beautiful underwater, too, but underwater they almost look like a ghost. Like they're just like a big teardrop, because usually all their fins aren't kind of splayed out like that. Like when they're moving, they're just coasting, and they literally just look like a big teardrop, and they're kind of have like they're almost like black and white. Whereas when you get them to the surface, they're black and blue, and they just look. My wife Katie's gotten really into diving in the last few years, and her fish identification's really good now. Yeah. But she always, there's certain species like black sea bass where she'll come up and she'll be like, "Man, I think I saw a black sea bass, but and it was big, but she was like, I didn't want to shoot it because I didn't know,
sure. Yeah.
So then we'll go home and I'll show her some pictures of, underwater photos, reference photos of black sea bass.
That's what I think it is. You need to see the underwater pictures
exactly
more than you need to see just like a sort of a drawing or a painting or a photograph of a fish out of the water, because it just doesn't necessarily look the same.
Right. Or like, grouper, for instance. I did a trip down to North Carolina last year. and which is an interesting place because you have all the southern species, it's kind of the top of their range, and all the northern species, it's the southern end. So you see all this really weird mix of species, but like the grouper, they have like broomtail grouper, they have gag grouper, they have scamp grouper, they have all these different kinds of grouper that all look pretty darn similar.
Right.
So
in body, because their body's shape and proportions
right, like a
broomtail.
tail, like the only thing that makes it look different than I think it's a gag grouper is that the tail is like looks like a broom, so it's got kind of like more points on the end of it. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more intricate, like, you know, smaller differences, but it's really hard to know the difference, in especially diving, you know. But
you did a dive last year. I remember you sent me some photos from, because like as you mentioned, you dive all over. One of the things I think is really cool is you and William will head down the coast.
We
and
do.
You'll just sort of dive your way up the coast, which I think is really cool. But you went either this year or last year off the coast, or you went up to what, like Grand Banks?
No, it wasn't quite that far. So we did. I mean, we were well past the canyon, the Northeast Canyon. So we were pretty much due east of Cape Cod, really, but northeast, I guess.
But in the Gulf Stream.
Yeah, so you're out. So you're in the Gulf Stream. It's blue water.
So a lot, just for people to understand, the Gulf Stream, which runs basically from the Gulf of Mexico up around Florida, up the East Coast, over to like up around Greenland, then heads west.
Right.
Heads east over to Northern Europe.
Yeah.
Right. So that current is like a river in the ocean.
It's unbelievable.
Totally different water temperature, totally different water color, visible from space.
We're talking like low 80s, like water temp.
So you're in a place where you would think cold water and cold water species, but you sent me photos that I was like, oh, wow. I show those photos to people all the time.
Unbelievable, yeah. I mean, the captain that I went out with, they do this kind of stuff all the time. For me, it was kind of, you know, I hope the first of many, but it's a magical place out there. It's blue water diving though, so it's very much the equipment's very different.
What were you targeting?
We were out there for tuna, mahi. Mahi are just, I think they're like one of the most magical fish in terms from an eating perspective too. God. I mean, they're beautiful, but their range is insane. I mean, they're like everywhere. Yeah. But they grow so fast.
And they're such a sustainable fishery.
Right. So however you feel about like the mercury thing or, you know, whatever, you know, so like they grow so fast that they don't have a lot of time to store a lot of heavy metals and stuff.
They don't bioaccumulate as much.
They don't bioaccumulate as much.
So that they're more sustainable to catch.
Right. Whereas you think of something like a tilefish or like some of these species that
redfish,
they spend their whole life at the bottom of the ocean and they live a long time and they accumulate, you know, a lot, whether that be microplastics or mercury, whatever. But so mahi was one of the things I was the most excited about. I mean, I was excited about tuna too, but it's a totally different kind of diving. It literally feels like you're it's blue water, so it's the bottom is hundreds or, you know, in that case, even thousands of feet.
It's pretty disorienting, deep. Huh?
And it's weird because it's like you are, you know, say you're neutrally buoyant at like 15 feet, 30 feet, whatever, and then you dive down, you get past whatever that point is that you're weighted to, then you are sinking.
Yeah, I want to make this clear to people. So based on how much weight based on your body's natural buoyancy,
right? Like
I have very little buoyancy. My wife is so buoyant that we can almost not get enough weights on her to get her to be able to kick down sometimes.
Yep.
So like depends on your body type and the suit you're wearing, and you're wearing weights. And like you said, there's a point at which you're neutrally buoyant. So let's say if that's at 15 feet, you're doing work to get down to 15 feet, and then you hit that point, and now you're like you just sink.
Right.
Downward.
Which is wild. And, the deeper you go, the more you're sinking. Like It's pretty eerie. And you weight yourself.
I've
never wanted to do something and not wanted to do something as much as this.
I mean, you weight yourself differently. You want to be neutrally buoyant at a different depth depending on what your final depth is, what the bottom is. So,
But there you have no bottom.
Yeah, there you have no bottom, but it's knowing what and this is where education I think really comes into it. Educating yourself is knowing what I knew because I had taken a free dive class, in the past. I know that I'm all about, like, I'm not a math person at all, but I'm all about, the statistics of, where in the water column you're going to black out, stuff like that. I mean, it's knowing that I was okay with sinking after a certain point because I knew that once I started coming back up, it's not like I was going to, it could happen. It has. I've heard some crazy stories.
But you're saying you're sort of safe at those depths.
Exactly. So then when you come back up, that your issues are going to happen when you're positively buoyant.
Right.
Okay. But there's always an element of risk, but it's like we're always doing one up, one down. Your systems have to be so dialed. Good, yeah. You need to have your two buddies that can dive as deep as you're diving. Yeah. Watching you the entire time. So they're not diving. They're and just out there the visibility is like 100 feet. So it's like I can see my buddy at depth, and it's like when you're hunting big pelagic species, you might need a backup shot depending on, because you're trying.
Your line goes to a buoy, right? So
so you're not attached to it. That's the other thing that's really different about blue water hunting is, and I'm by no means an expert on blue water hunting. Most of my diving has been inshore using a reel on my gun. But out there, the systems are very different. I'm still learning a lot about it, but the systems
you don't want to be attached to a tuna that's ripping off. Right?
So out there, when you're hunting, the gun is essentially just a vessel to get the shaft in the spear into the fish. Yeah. And then there's a few wraps on the gun, or sometimes not even a wrap, and then it goes
on the reel. You mean?
On around the line release on the gun. Yeah. And then when you shoot, it essentially disconnects from the gun. So you still have the gun, but you're disconnected from the situation.
The fish, the line, the shaft, and
goes up to a buoy.
Yeah.
And these blue water buoys are crazy. Like they're good to like 2 or 3 atmospheres of pressure to not explode. So they can pull it down. And sometimes, depending on the size of the fish, you have one buoy attached to another buoy. Okay. So you have some redundancy.
Those buoys are giving some drag to the fish too.
Yeah, but not a ton. Okay. But yeah, they are if they're trying to go down.
But it definitely allows you to find that fish too.
Yeah, and then we're using big bungees. So these bungees are like 100 feet and stretch to like 200 feet. So it's just all one big bungee. So because you don't want, a lot of these fish are softer flesh fish.
Oh, so you need something so they don't pull out.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't asked you about this yet except by text. So you sent me a picture of you swimming with a whale shark.
Yeah.
What was that about?
That's
a crazy photo, dude.
It was pretty wild.
When you sent it, I was like, oh, that's not him. And then I was like, I recognize
that was
suit.
a highlight. that was, for me, was definitely the highlight.
I was like, that's Dylan's suit, man. I think he's with a whale shark.
It was pretty cool. Yeah, we ran into a whale shark out there.
Which, again, I would just never have imagined being up here.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. Yeah, I've been talking a little bit to, there's a whale shark, I don't know if it's Conservancy. I don't really know. But an organization that keeps tabs on research, tabs on all the kind of whale sharks around the world. And they reached out to me after seeing a couple photos, and they were saying that it's pretty rare to see whale sharks in the Northeast that far.
Yeah. This is the largest fish in the world, correct?
Yep. And they're not
Tell us about it though. Like, what was
unbelievable.
That like?
So they don't. I can't imagine they have any predators. So they're just at that size or that scale, Yeah. So, they're just kind of moving slow. They're on there.
Were you holding on to it in that picture?
No, not quite.
You're like right there with it though.
Not quite. Yeah, it was right next to it, like right there. Yeah. But totally graceful. The way they move, it's just unbelievable. Like and the power. They're just all muscle. Yeah. But it's like slow. They don't have to move fast ever. So they're just moving slow. There's like fish. There's like
next to it must have been pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, unbelievable. If any of your listeners haven't seen a whale shark either, You got to look up tog and you got to look up whale sharks. But the whale sharks, I mean, they look like they're from another planet.
Yeah, so the whale shark has this like pattern of like lines and dots, right?
Totally
that almost look like somebody
wild.
took a spray can to it or something.
Yeah, I mean, it literally looks like from another planet. It's crazy. They're filter feeders. They just feed on, plankton and krill and like small.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know that much about them. I don't know what their migration is, but I think they can go really far south and then they can end up really far north. But I've never seen an animal that big, up close.
Yeah.
I mean,
it is a shark, right?
It's
not
shark.
a whale. It's a shark.
Not a mammal.
It's a
It's a fish.
Yeah.
I think it's the biggest fish by far.
I've seen
in
one
the
butchered
ocean.
once. I found a video. People were cutting it up.
Really?
And inside, because they're like a shark, so it's like all cartilage. It doesn't have any hard tissues, and so they were just slicing it, like just cutting off slices like you cut a hot dog up or something. It was pretty remarkable, and you just see this.
That's
sort of
crazy.
spinal
Was
cord
that
right through
like?
it.
Did it wash up somewhere or something?
No, I think that they're in Indonesia. I think is where I hate to say this out loud because I'm not totally sure, but I think it was Indonesian.
Really?
What I saw, and there's places. I did an interview with a guy, Doug Bott Clark, who went to Indonesia and lived with. I haven't released this yet, but he lived with a tribe there who are indigenous hunters who hunt sperm whales, devil rays, orca, dolphin, and that's what they live on.
Yeah.
They're subsistence hunters. Still an indigenous hunter-gathering group, but they live just in one village, and instead of having a huge landmass that they hunt and gather, they have a bay that they hunt in that's so prolific.
And they could probably harvest one of any of those species.
They harvest. It feeds the whole village. They have a whole economy based on these like 6 inches strips of whale meat.
Yeah.
And they harvest about 20 sperm whales a year.
Wow.
And I don't know if it was them or somewhere around there. Anyway, I don't quote me on that. I just know that I saw a video of one being cut up and was like, whoa, that's a lot of meat.
They're gigantic.
Yeah.
I mean, it was one of the most magical experiences I've ever had in my whole life.
Just
for
like
sure.
when you first saw it, what was happening?
Yeah, so we saw it. I mean, we hopped in the water. We were looking for tuna, mahi, and when you just sense. So, I mean, it's just like on land when you sense there's something big around, And I remember I turned around in the water and he was just cruising around. I mean, they look like almost like a cartoon or something when they're coming right at you. Like they almost look like they're smiling at you, and then but they're just peaceful giants.
No teeth.
No teeth at all. Yeah, I mean, I think they filter feed through their gills, kind of like how a whale would with baleen. But but yeah, I mean, but you literally I almost felt like I could, if I stayed right in front of him, I could just go right inside of him and he'd have no idea, or her. Yeah.
And it's so interesting. I know when I'm down there, one of the things that's strange to me too, it's almost like when if you're looking through binoculars or you're wearing night vision goggles or something, you have this limited field of view, through your mask. Yeah. And one of the things when I'm diving, I didn't feel it so much here in Maine, but I definitely feel it down south where it's like you're wanting to look behind you from time to time because you don't know what's there. And there's like that little bit of claustrophobia in the sense that you have a reduced field of vision, right? So it's like, you can't just see out of your peripheral vision the way that you're used to on dry land. So, for me, it's like, is there a shark anywhere around here? You got to be like looking over your shoulder in order to see.
It's different. It's a contrast. I mean, but I think it's all those little things. It's the reduced field of vision on a mask. It's the breathing through a snorkel. And up here, a lot of times when you're diving with a snorkel, you got some wind chop, and then your snorkel, almost every breath sometimes, is full of water.
Yeah.
And so you just clearing your snorkel at first, when you first start diving, is overwhelming thought. I mean, the thought of having to clear your snorkel can be really overwhelming, or the sensation of having that little bit of resistance from the water when you need to just shoot out a burst of air to clear it. Now, it's so second
Second
nature. I
nature.
don't even think about it.
For me, it's a lot of my mask gets water in it because of my beard,
Your
my
beard.
mustache.
Yeah.
Like I have to, sometimes like if, for people who've seen my Instagram or something, sometimes you'll notice on a selfie that I've got like a little patch missing under my
'cause you
nose
gotta
because I have to
shave it.
shave a little
Yeah.
section to get a seal with the gasket. But I spend a lot of time having to clear my mask as well. And I think some people listening may have seen a photo of me where I had not
I know the one you're
pressurized
talking
my
about.
mask. So that was from my class. I just didn't understand. They had explained it. I didn't understand it well, but it was like as you're diving down and the pressure of the water is compressing the air inside your mask.
Yeah. So not only do you need to equalize your ears, you need to
ears.
equalize your mask.
Right.
as
So
well.
that's good to point out too, is as you're diving down and even right at the surface, you're basically pinching off your nose and blowing to pressurize your ears. But as you go down, the air inside your mask is shrinking, the volume of it, and that creates suction. And I just blew out every blood vessel in my eyeballs until my eyes were like demonically blood red for about a week.
That was metal.
Oh, it was so metal. And it hurt, man, when I did it. It hurt. It didn't hurt after, but it hurt in the moment. But basically what I now know to do is exhale a little bit through my nose to put air back into my mask. And I want to point out that that's why, because I've seen there's that one, there might be Indonesia as well. There's who are the folks that spearfish in Indonesia? There's been some documentaries. They've been in Human Planet. They make their own little goggles.
That's Indonesia. Yeah.
Yeah,
I believe.
they're diving in like what look like swim
I don't
goggles,
know how
and it's
they-
like you
but I
can't
think the
pressurize
depth-
those.
I think the depths are
Not so
just
deep.
not deep.
Yeah.
Like their reefs come right up to
Yeah.
the. But yeah, it's wild, and we have so much gear. It's so funny how people. I mean, every activity or form of hunting or anything, there's just so many technological advancements now.
Oh, I see skis here. Like I'll go into the antique stores and I'll see old skis, just like wooden
skis.
planks. Yeah,
Yeah.
with like a very rudimentary binding to them, like just basically like a piece of strap on a piece of wood.
Yeah, that was state of the art at one
skiing.
time.
And now you look at where the equipment's
Yeah.
at. It doesn't take that long for the advancements. And so, like you said, now anybody who comes into this, it's like
There's a
some
lot of
really good
resources. I think just back to the diving process a little bit too. I think when I first talk to people who are intrigued by diving, want to get into it, their biggest concern is their breath hold. They always say, I'm not going to be able to hold my breath. I know I can't hold my breath.
How long are you
enough
holding
to
your
fin-
breath underwater?
Underwater, I mean,
Like when-
not
when-
like a static breath hold. I mean, most dives I would say are between a minute and 30, minute 40 maybe.
up to a minute 40, you're saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say something like
Then
that.
how long does it take you to get down to where you're hunting?
Not long. I mean, I think probably
A few seconds.
A few seconds?
Yeah, a few seconds. Yeah, probably under.
Because you're going straight down. Like you're not going down at an angle usually. Usually you're turning up, going straight down, settling,
Yeah.
and coming straight up, typically.
Yeah, so I mean, it's amazing what you can accomplish in a really short amount of time. And I think a lot of people think, oh my gosh, or they compare it to scuba diving, or, they're thinking, wow, how am I going to get anything done in this amount of time? Or I can't, some of the guys I got into diving with, some of the older, the badass older, like the OG divers in the Northeast.
Watermen.
Some of them smoke like a pack of cigarettes a day,
Still
and they're
dive.
still
Yeah.
diving circles around me.
Right.
I mean, it's the breath hold is a component, but comfort in the water
Bigger.
is the number one
I would agree.
thing. And
I'd
it's,
agree.
it's
I can
and
hold
I tell
my
people
breath
that
longer
all
on the
time. I
surface
tell
than
people
my
that
wife
all the
can,
time.
but in the water, it's no contest. She's so much more
Yeah.
comfortable, and the amount of movement that I do to accomplish things versus the amount of how little, and that's what I want to point out too. You just brought up all the gear. The limiting factor is your relaxation, comfort, and breath control, not your equipment. Right. So
Totally.
this isn't a.
I
I was
totally
down in
agree with
Bahamas
that, yeah.
and I show up there. We go out we charter a boat to go spearfishing, right? And I got this I'm head to toe in like Rife International camo. I got my new spear gun. I got my goggle. Well, actually, there was pole spear because we're in Bahamas. But I got my fins. I got all this gear, I look super cool, like out of the magazine. And then the boat captain, who grew up in Bahamas, he just gets out in a pair of board shorts. I don't even know if maybe just like some cheap mask he threw on. And I'll watch him go like 60 feet down, grab a fish, come back up, just like, didn't even wear fins. He just kicking down with his bare feet. And then I got all the equipment, and I get in there and I can't do anything that he's doing. He's like, well, he tells me, go down and get that crab. And it's like, bro, I don't even know if I can I remember I dropped my spear. It was like one of my first times out on, taking a boat out. I was just a mess. Everything went wrong, I ended up spearing this gigantic puffer fish. I mean, just everything went wrong, I was a fool. Anyway, watching this guy who just grew up doing it, totally comfortable, been there his whole life, doesn't even need gear. And it was his relaxation. He's going down to 60, 70 feet, settling on this reef, coming back up. So it's like you can't buy yourself into these skills. You can get all the great equipment, and that's nice, but it doesn't really make you any better than somebody with rudimentary equipment who's comfortable in the water.
Not at all. And they even say that physical fitness doesn't even play in.
Don't they
much,
say? Yeah.
Which is wild.
Top athletes
top
in
athletes
this scene do not look like top athletes.
Don't perform better than somebody.
That's a really good point. You see some of the very best in the world, and you're like not even looking fit compared to if we're talking about sprinting. You look at like the best rock climbers.
Yeah.
You can tell that they're rock climbers. You
Right.
see that physique. You look at the
mental.
best
mental.
divers, and it's not like that.
Yeah, it's mental.
Yeah, wow, it's really interesting, man. Tell us about the food component a little bit. Tell us about when you hunt for tog, but are you able to eat fish throughout the year, and what do you?
Yeah,
what do you like doing with it?
it's interesting. You listen to a lot of. I think Kimmy actually talked about it maybe on the last podcast that she was on with you, and she. It's a lot of these cultures in like warmer places like Hawaii and stuff. You're really only taking the fish. And when I was just in Mexico, the same thing. You're taking the fish for that day.
Right.
Whereas we don't really have that luxury here
Right.
because the season is so short. So my goal is to, it sounds kind of crazy, but to fill the freezer. Because that's what we're going to eat all winter. So
Right.
I hate to freeze fish sometimes because I wish I could just eat it fresh all the time.
Sure.
But
like you said, it's a luxury though.
Yeah, so we freeze it. I freeze a lot of tog. I try to have
Vacuum
some
pack?
variety. Yeah, we vacuum seal it.
Yeah.
Just because we get a much longer life.
Oh, it's
frozen
an
life out of
difference.
it.
Yeah.
But we end up with about 7 or 8 species, I think, coming into the winter because we do make several trips down the coast.
Right. Okay.
So like Rhode Island, I mean, I've had a 6 species day before.
Okay.
So I've had a day in Rhode Island where we were able to take 6 different species.
Were you taking skates down there?
We did. Yeah, we took a skate.
Which must be great.
Which was
Grant and I ate
experimental.
some stingray down in Florida, which was just amazing to us how good that meat was.
Yeah, they're really good. I mean, that was our first time. Will and I were on our annual little spearfishing trip down the coast, and we were diving and came across just the biggest. I mean, we catch skate, rod and reel, and they're usually not that big. This thing was gigantic. And I had read that skate wings are really, really good. So we took one and then brought it back, kind of figured out how to dress it and fillet it.
It's interesting riding your fillet knife
weird,
down those wings, right?
It's weird. And then we cooked it up and we loved it. We also cooked a sea robin that same day,
no kidding.
which was
How was
also
that?
really good.
Was it? Yeah.
The tail is
Strange-looking
the
fish.
section you get. It's kind of like a monkfish almost.
Oh
or
yeah,
something.
yeah. So they got like that big beefy head and upper body, but then they got that little
exactly
loin meat down the back.
But it's it's fun to experiment with some of these fish that people think are kind of trash fish. They're really there's a
I
lot
hate that
of
term, like trash fish or trash species.
Dogfish is another. There's just people think of them as a pest, but when prepared right, they're really good.
Yeah. Found that to be almost every animal that I've ever eaten.
Yeah, exactly.
We were just eating beaver last week or this week, and it was like
cool.
unbelievably good meat.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to another podcast. You were talking about bluefish and people's perception of bluefish and how they're oily, and they are oily, but smoked bluefish.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other ways to prepare them, but
Sure.
smoked bluefish is my favorite smoked fish,
Yeah.
hands down.
I like mackerel like that too. It can be really good. If you learn how to fillet mackerel out right, they're fantastic.
Yeah.
know?
So I don't know. A lot of it's just name recognition and what everybody else is fishing for, and the herd mentality, and everybody kind of hops on it. And that's the way it is with striped bass. So striped bass are, I like eating them, but I would take tog over striped bass any day.
So that's the main thing you're trying to put in the freezer is tog?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that might just be a me thing, but I love tog.
Yeah,
and I love how versatile it is. I mean, I just learned from a spearfishing buddy, I learned how to make tog cakes. So we kind of like a crab cake, but with tog, which is really a cool, like a different way to prepare it, because I kind of get hung up in like the fish taco route, or just pan frying them or baking them or grilling them.
What are you doing to make those?
The cakes?
Yeah.
I think it was like we were mixing potato, like essentially like mashed potatoes almost, mixing that in just to kind of get the consistency right, and then a bunch of different spices. We did, you put an egg in there. I think we did like a little almond flour maybe or something, but I'd have to get the exact recipe.
But you're just frying those up like patties.
Yeah, and you don't. The key that my buddy discovered was you don't cook the fish first. So you got to make sure that it's all
goes in raw.
It all goes in raw, and the cooking happens in the cake itself. But yeah, can't take credit for the tog cakes, but they were unbelievable. Good, really good. But yeah, tog, it freezes really well. But we have so many fish that are such good eating here. Fluke, summer flounder, unbelievable.
I'd like to get out with you for some of the winter flounder and just like learn a little bit about that fishery from a gigging perspective, because I haven't really done it.
Yeah,
I saw you get one that time I went out with you, but I haven't ever harvested one.
Yeah, you have to be. Flounder it's a totally different approach, because most fish, you get close to them, and if you're moving much, they're gonna take off on you. But their whole strategy is camouflage. So they kind of let you get right there, but the hard thing is finding them. So you're just kind of looking for those eyes,
seeing them in the first place.
But yeah, I will say though, it's magical here that you can go out and, who knows, maybe it'll change after this podcast, but you can go out and not see a soul. Whereas
I don't think it'll change after this podcast. I don't think anybody's really. I just don't think a lot of people are really up for that level of challenge or cold or.
Well, and
all of
persistence.
It, you know?
I mean, it's persistence. I mean, I've had a lot of friends who they get excited, they buy all the gear, they come out with me a few times.
Well, I did that. I showed up with all kinds of gear.
I mean, you've got your time is valuable. You got a lot of different. But
I would like to be doing. I would like to do more of it
next summer.
Each year.
I think next summer. But yeah, I mean, that's a big reason why we do it is to eat it. I mean, that's why. I mean, I hate buying fish. I don't. But I realize that that's kind of, I'm lucky that I have the time and the resources to go diving, because I think I can't. Everybody can't be fed that way. So
and that's one of the interesting things that always strikes me is that the over-exploitation of ocean fisheries, which everybody's talking about, is driven by people who don't fish. So it's the purchasing of the fish by people who don't fish. It's not the people who recreationally fish for food or subsistence fish for food. We're not having an impact on fisheries. It's when the big commercial fisheries take place. And you could be like, well, those commercial fishermen. It's like, no, those commercial fishermen are doing the job that the people inland are paying them to go do. So it's this interesting thing going on. But I think the more people that go out and actually participate, I always just imagine, and I know this is politically contentious, but I just always imagine a world where if you want to eat it, you have to go do it or know someone who does. That would get rid of so many of these overexploitation problems. It's the same with hunting. It's like, that's why we always say the best food money can't buy.
Right.
Your tog is the best food money can't buy. Like you have to go out and do it. I just think that's really awesome.
Yeah, but I mean, it is tough too. Like where fish populations stand now, even if only a few more people were doing what we're doing, it would have an impact. It's like
here at this northernmost bit of the range.
It can't sustain much at this point.
Right.
Much pressure.
Yeah, but it's cool that you're out there, and I like that you literally have eyes on the fishery, because, like, again, even with your polarized sunglasses, at the surface, you're not able to see what's really going on down there,
Yeah,
and
and
you have eyes on that fishery.
Well, I had a buddy who worked at the Gulf of Maine Research
Yep,
Institute, and he had me come in, and I just had lunch with the two head marine biologists there, and they're doing a lot with like bluefin tuna research, researching like the different populations of the Mediterranean, and they're like drilling into not an otolith? I don't know. There's like a part of their inner ear.
Yeah, I think it's an otolith.
Yeah, I think it's an otolith, and it holds a lot of like chemistry history of like the chemical makeup of the water that they are in at different times in their lives.
Yep.
So they're like drilling
looking for carbon isotopes or something.
Yeah,
like that.
and it's just fascinating. So I was learning a lot about that, but then they were interested to hear about my experience with Tautog.
Yeah.
Because honestly, it seemed like their perception was pretty similar to DMR. It's they're not here. So it was cool to talk to them, and they seemed really surprised that there were any tog here.
Yeah. You'd think, though, that they would know, but like they're not seeing it.
But they're not. I mean, they're not going to find tog on their population studies because they're rod and reel fishing for fish in a certain area, and that's how they do their population studies. And tog eat a very specific diet that not many other fish eat, so you're not going to catch them.
Yeah, I love this idea that when you hunt and gather, you become like a citizen ecologist, and it's sort of like with commercial fishermen versus the marine biologists. You always have this arguments back and forth with them because the fishermen are like, "Look, I see this every day. You're sitting in an office." Now, I know a lot of marine biologists are not in an office, and I'm not taking a position on this, but you sometimes get these arguments that go back and forth, and it's like, well, what are you seeing every day? That's important too. We need to factor that in, and more, it seems like the policy setters are starting to listen to the fishermen and factor that into decision making. Similarly, it's like, especially right now, because there's no question our climate's changing. We're seeing it in the Gulf of Maine. There's no question that there's so many problems with our ecosystems. But if you just read headlines every day, you would think that the sky was falling, like today, right now, we're all going to die. And you're down there and you like actually, whether that's true or not, at least you get to go see for yourself. Mm-hmm. And I like this idea of becoming a citizen ecologist. Like, it takes a lot of that stress out. Those headlines are pretty scary. You just think like all that's happening is dead fish washing up on the beaches and the end of all ocean life and all. It's like, well, at least go look for yourself. So I love that you're out there. Like, you have eyes. You're going to be the first person to see changes in the Gulf of Maine. Visually, you're there. I just think that's really cool. I just really like what you're doing, man. I think it's awesome.
Well, likewise.
Yeah. Where do people, so we said it before, but tell people again where they can see, a little bit. Because on your Instagram, you're also detailing a bit of your diving as well, so it's not just...
Yeah, I try to do a couple kind of lifestyle things in there, too, around my diving. Because that is ultimately where the inspiration for my art comes from.
Yeah,
so,
right.
But yeah, so Instagram, website, Facebook, it's all Bold Coast Burns. And I'm very active on Instagram. There's a forum on my website where you can just, reach out via email. Email's the same, boldcoastburns@gmail.com.
And you ship your art all over the country?
I do.
In the world, too?
Not really.
Because you were talking about some Dubai customers or something.
Yeah, I have done it. But it's usually I kind of do it like a case-by-case kind of like I work with them on that.
Shipping's always a limiting factor with art.
Yeah, and certain countries are a lot harder with customs and stuff, like especially with big pieces of art and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, anywhere in the U.S., shipping's easy, and I try. Like I said, I try to kind of have something for everybody who's
price points
like
and stuff.
A fish person.
Yeah, well, I just really recommend get over and check out his artwork. Take a peek. Like I said, I got my first piece today from him, which I've been like eager to have for a while. So I'm really honored that it's that cod too. And you'd brought me that print of a cod a couple years ago from my party.
I know you're the cod guy.
Well, I got that sticker on my car. And even if you're not into getting a big piece of art, check out the decals that he does and stuff like that. I think you're going to like his artwork a lot. I'm a huge fan, man, of your work. I just think it's amazing. So
thank you.
Anyway, thanks for coming up and sitting with us. And I would love to get out with you again next year. And I know Avani's really looking forward to diving up here too. So, and hunting with me below sea level. So
We'll do it. Yeah, we'll do it.
Any final thoughts for people?
I don't think so. I guess just, I'm an open book. I'd love for people to reach out if they are interested in getting into diving up here. I'm always kind of trying to promote it because honestly, at the end of the day, the more people who are in the water interacting with that environment and seeing what's happening, what's going on, it's just going to raise, education.
Right.
And, so feel free to reach out. I'd love to give people any info I can.
That's cool, man, because it's sort of that balance between I don't want anybody else in my spots and I don't want this thing to die either, right? It's
exactly.
Like both things.
But ultimately, I think that the community in the southern New England that I was talking about, or in Florida or whatever, I think that those spearfishing communities have been beneficial for those ecosystems ultimately.
Well, it's just cool, man. I mean, just in closing to say, like you said, in those communities, there's a lot of people participating. And you get up here and you're kind of holding it down for the state of Maine. It's a very unique thing you do. And so you have that, and then you have this really unique art. And I just think you're a really cool dude. I love what you're doing up here. So thanks for the way you represent the Bold Coast.
And thank you. This is a great opportunity. Psyched to be here and love what you're doing.
Thank you. Check them out at Bold Coast Burns.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow the show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.